Hello, my name is Jonas Melo. I am archivist, master in communication and information from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, and PhD student from the University of Porto and the University of Aveiro in Portugal. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to the organization for the opportunity to present my research at Dione 2021. So, the title of the paper I'm going to present is International Initiatives and Advances in Brazil for Government Web Archiving, wrote for me, Jonas Melo, and Moisés Rockenbach. The paper is organized in Introduction, Government Web Archiving in Brazil, concluding remarks and references. Our society is inserted in the technological context from the digitalized routines. As a result, our social memory is also being produced as a consequence of these digital devices. After all, the internet reflects parts of our social memory, and we have to guarantee mechanisms for its preservation. What must be emphasized to understand the relationship between technology and society is that the whole of the state is promoting technological innovations. In this way, it's understood the government should promote the transparency of their actions through continuous accountability, for example. In addition to official documents, government websites also provide access to official statements. And for this reason, governments have a fundamental role in establishing routines to preserve the heritage that is being produced exclusively through the internet. The web archiving is recognized for its historical, cultural, and intellectual preservation. Several countries have established archiving initiatives to crawl and store web content. In Latin America, only Chile has its own web archive, how you can see on the map. In Brazil, there is still no systematic archiving on the web. There are some actions that will be presented below. The National Archives, the UK National Archives declares that web archiving is a vital process to ensure that people and organizations can access and reuse knowledge in the long term. About government web archiving, government websites play an important role in the dissemination government information. We are showing to you some international web archiving initiatives. One of the largest and most used web archiving in the world contain more than 3 billion URLs is the UK Government Web Archive. The initiative is part of a program, program by the National Archives that involves managing the British government network. The National Archives' approach to government web archiving involves remote and automatic collections of websites according to a schedule using a crawler. This process of selecting the web content to be preserved is one of the first steps that must be established when building a web archive. In archival science, this process is known as appraisal. In library science, we call collections development. In relation to USA government websites, two specific initiatives that are relevant to analysis. One of these initiatives is the collaborative web archive they call End of Term Web Archive US Government Websites, EOT, created in 2008. They collected websites that were at risk of changing or disappear during government transitions, for example, whitehouse.gov. Another US initiative that preserves government websites is the movement promoted by scientists to save government information on climate change. Could be lost or becoming invaluable with the transition government in 2016 to 2017, like EPA and NOAA websites. The initiative by the state of Sarawak in Malaysia is a government web archiving that also deserves mention. The objective of this is to preserve the evidence of web contents published by departments and agents of the public administration of the state. The law of legal deposit has been a normative tool used to justify the need to preserve websites in this country and in others like in Croatia. In Croatia, the National and University Library of Zagreb established in 2004 that all registered websites in the country would have a copy deposit in the library. In 2011, they collected the national domain for the first time and started thematic collections, such as municipal elections. Like these initiatives, there are others that promote the preservation of government websites. With these examples, it can be seen that the governmental web archiving takes place in different ways, being from the central government on proposal or through to civil organizations or groups, or even through specific initiatives of memories places. Anyway, it is an interdisciplinary work, involves technology and routines of information science and technology. Each initiative has its own routines, criteria, selections process, softwares, and flow established according to the need to compose the web archive. The web archive in Brazil. Brazilian law presents several points about the state's responsibility with regards to the management, access, and preservation of its documents. Brazil has a federal law which provides for the national policy on archives. The National Archives of Brazil, the institution responsible for preparing national management policies, excluded the documents produced on the web from its digital preservation policy, saying that in the future this type of documents will be contemplated. But in Brazilian Academy, the web archiving subject is still recent, but it's already promotes discussions on digital preservation in the national scenery. In 2017, was created the research group on web archiving and digital preservation to discuss the subject in Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. The research group studies aspects of preservation, use, and access over time of digital documents made available on the web, is developing some research projects such as web archiving of the Brazilian elections and the Brazilian web archiving, preservation policies, and technological models. Also presented during the International Internet Preservation Consortium Web Archiving Conference in 2019 in Zagreb, Croatia. One of these surveys investigates the possibilities of archiving Brazilian federal government websites. 23 government websites as object of analysis, it concludes that the websites of Brazilian federal government are archivable without loss of relevant information, and that the country lacks public policy to systematize the archiving of government websites. Less than 1 year after the end of that survey, it's possible to notice changes in the websites analyzed in terms of layout and available content. In the example on the screen is the Ministry of Defense websites archived in December 2019 and the some websites in October 2020, less than 1 year. It is possible to see that there has been a change in layout, in menu, navigation menu, colors, structures of the websites. As there is still no systematic preservation of the analyzed websites, we can already say that unique information produced by the government has been lost. Although the laws are clear about the need to preservation documents produced at the governmental level, there is an understanding on the part of the systematic community that websites are not documents that should be preserved. The result is the permanent loss of digital information produced exclusively on government websites, causing erasure of political history. Have you ever questioned where is the information published on the past government websites? A survey about government communication available on the official websites of Presidency of Brazil, produced during the government of Michel Temer and Dilma Rousseff, discussing the impacts of preserving and erasing government communications for the country's political memory. The conclusion of the survey is that websites are undergoing constant modifications to remove content from previous governments and causing difficulty in accessing sections or themes related to governments that are already closed, especially when the political lines do not converge with the current government. The exclusion of content produced during previous mandate make it evident that there is no policy in Brazil to preserve content published on official websites. This prevents society from having access to these contents, such as governmental actions, advertising campaigns, language, images, speeches, and political positions that guide the actions of that government. So it is understood that it is urgent to implement a policy for the preservation of government websites in Brazil. Part of the institutional memory published only on the internet is lost when there are changes in government. For concluding remarks, the long-term maintenance of governmental information available on the web is fundamental for public debate and for the monitoring of government actions by society. To guarantee the preservation of these contents, the state should define its policy for the preservation of digital documents, including those produced in a web environment. Some of the ways that Brazil could follow to effectively implement a web archive initiative would be to select web preservation and archiving technologies, and content to be archived. Thanks. Here is my email address, jonasferrigolo@gmail.com. In this QR code, you can access the websites of our research group. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Monteiro. I am a doctoral student in the postgraduate program in Information Science at São Paulo State University, Unesp, Brazil. I am librarian at Unesp too. This work have the co-worker Dr. Professor Ricardo César Gonçalves Santana. The research data sharing from a work of factors that can influence research. The pandemic caused by COVID demonstrated the relevance of data sharing. The pandemic motivated the collaboration between agents of the scientific community to share data and research results for the diagnostic, treatment, and development of vaccine with the efficiency that the situation required. In the health area, two dimensions of interest can be perceived: social and commercial. Health is a sensitive and strategic area for society living with intense market potential, profitable and competitive, supported by a structured market by patrimonial law, patents, publication in high-impact journals, as well as by moral law, quotation, recognizing, and prestige among peers. In this scenario, premises such as open science and open access to research data contribute to the acceleration of discussion and collaboration by the scientific community. The present context reinforces the relevance of the collaboration between agents of scientific community, but also the conflicts and benefits that can emerge with the sharing of data and research results. It is necessary to identify the different factors that can influence research to share or retain their datasets, which include, but are not limited to, institutional, cultural, ethical, social, and personal. Data sharing contributes to increase the transparency of research and consequently the credibility of its results, as well as maximize the replication of data. Accelerate scientific collaboration, testing different hypotheses, reducing costs, increase citation among their benefits. Once the data is retained, the benefits are not enjoyed. The objective is identify factors that can influence the perception and attitude of the research to the act of sharing datasets. Also, proposing a framework with the identified factors. To achieve the objective and support this discussion, the Ciência Datus repository was analyzed. Ciência Datus is a data repository result from the cooperation agreement between libraries in the Community of Madrid, composed of 6 universities: Universidade Alcalá, Universidade Autônoma de Madrid, Universidade Carlos III de Madrid, Universidade Politécnica de Madrid, Universidade Rei Juan Carlos, and UNED, members of the Madranhos Consortium. This article uses documentary research of a script nature, in which laws, regulation, manuals, guidelines, audiovisuals, infographics, statements, and reports made available by the Consortium Madranho and its libraries, as well as questionnaires and interviews applied to librarians who work in the repository. The questionnaire was composed by 13 questions, 20 of which were closed and 10 open, the last ones following as a script for the interview. The questions address the aspects of the activities performed with the data management and its life cycle, as well as the competence and skills required to work in the repository, both in a technical service and in user support and training. With the application of the content analysis method and the category analysis technique, 6 categories were defined: cognitive, normative, regulatory, career, resource, and social. Then, for each category, 13 indicators were identified that make up the framework. The selection and delimitation of the indicators in category was supported by the institutional theory, theory of planned behavior, and the model for data sharing behavior. The analysis of the data provide elaboration of the framework. The framework has 3 dimensions: institutional dimension, analysis dimension, research dimension. This is the complete framework, which is categories and indicators. The institutional dimensions, based on institutional theory, has 3 categories and 7 indicators: cultural, data management plan, open science, fair principles, find agencies, repository, rules, and law. The institutional dimension is related to the institutional theory, comes from sociological and organizational studies, and helps the connection between institutions, infrastructure, and people, and analyze how social actors perform acceptable behaviors to legitimize in the face of institutional pressures. The contexts in which scientists are acting provides insights into how social actors are influenced by institutional pressures within the institutional environment. The institutional theory has 3 pillars that resulted in the categories in this research: cognitive, normative, and regulative. In this article, the cognitive has a cultural indicator. That means the presence and interaction between the actors, internalized the understanding of each actor, based on his interpretation of the social reality in which the participants, together with the cultural system of which the research is part. The normative is the introduction of the prescriptive, evaluate, and mandatory dimensions in social life, in which they are specified as their elements, as their basis must be made, defining meanings, legitimate to the values and rules adopted, and consist in the 5 indicators: data management plan, open science, fair principles, find agencies, and repository. Regulative establish rules and laws, inspection them, and establish rewards and punishments in attempt to influence future behavior. The cultural points out the relationship and interaction between the actors in institutional, national, international level. The indicator highlights the organizational system and social life with rights, rules, and responsibilities. Data management plans is the document requested by funding agencies and which articulates aspects of data management. Open science encompasses open scientific practice and changes the behavior of research. Fair principles: findable, accessible, interpretable, and reusable. Guiding principles in which they establish and regulate the procedures so that the metadata and data, in addition to requiring changes in terms of culture and research practice. Find agencies. Their guidelines are being articulated according to institutional and social needs, and that involves establishing rules and how they should be applied. Repository formulates policies and guidelines related to data management and conducts data sharing behavior. Researcher researches and articulates the demands of the other elements on the framework. Rules and laws related to researchers' understanding of the legislation and regulation on international management spheres, their country, their university, and their repository. Analyze dimension. In this dimension, the attitudes and perception of research are analyzed. Analyze dimension. Perception. Perception is the resources and opportunities available to the researcher that impact his intention and action and will dictate the probability of sharing the datasets. Perception also means research's perception of the easy or difficulty in carrying out the behavior of interest. Behavioral attitude. Correspondent to behavior, the act of sharing your datasets. After assessing and perceiving the advantages and disadvantages of the scenario and the social and institutional pressures, the researcher decides between the available alternatives. Research dimension. And the dimension research, there are career, research, and social. Career is the benefits, risk, and efforts. Research is the library and supports. Social, benefits for society and ethics. The indicator benefits are the benefits perceived and expected from the sharing of data result from the researcher's work. Risks are all the risks perceived in the process of sharing your data. Efforts are the activities, times, and energy spent on managing the data and preparing it for sharing. Librarian support is the support from librarians in data management, working with repositories, training research, and guiding researchers on their data needs. Benefits for society. Needs for making data available for the agility to support a certain demand for society. Speed situation, analysis, and decision making. And ethic. Ethic indicates the set of values of an area of knowledge and is appropriate behavior or not, along with the duties, principles, and norms. The complete framework with the categories and indicators. The final framework was composed based on the categories and indicators identified in the pre-analysis proposed in the content analysis method. Considerations. This article presents theoretical and practical contribution to the study of institutional and person factors that can influence research in sharing the datasets. A framework of factors that could potentially influence the attitude of research and share or retain their dataset was developed and presented. The composition of these factors considered elements such as career, resources, cognitive perceptions, normative and regulatory issues, and social aspects. The present frameworks provide a scenario of basic factors of probably influence that can instigate or inhibit research of the various areas of knowledge. Therefore, This study aims to contribute to the direction of future study on various aspects of data managing. The perception and sharing attitude of researchers may change depending on the region of operation, policies, institutional norms, and characteristics of their community. It is likely that study of the same nature will find different indicators, highlighting the intrinsic particulars of each social context. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Areli, and I'm here to present the work Indexes for Evaluating Research Groups, Challenges and Opportunities. This work was produced in the first year of my doctoral degree in the graduate program in Information Science, PGSIM, at Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina, in a collaboration with my advisor, Professor Moisés Lima Dutra. The presentation is divided in this form. 1. Introduction, with the presentation of the problem and objective. 2. Research methodology. 3. Literature review, where we present a summary table with the main related work. 4. Discussion, that we divided in two main groups, the challenges to evaluate groups of researchers and the opportunities in this field. And 5. Conclusions of this work. During the last year, scientific researchers could experience a facilitation in the access of papers and other related files, such as databases, through the web. Based on the extension of this access, it was possible to measure how important is a paper or how relevant a research work is to other researchers. The relevance of a scientist, or even a group of scientists, can be measured using quantitative aspects as number of papers and number of citations. By using these measures, the main benefit is to promote a fairer distribution of funds to be used for new research projects without any interference of friendship or politic matters. In this work, we studied the indexes to evaluate both quantity and also quality in the production of articles from researchers. We specifically focused our analysis on groups of researchers, understanding how each index is calculated, how each variable is used, and, based on those aspects, verifying the challenges and opportunities to apply the indexes to groups of researchers. More specifically, we analyzed some extensions of age indexes for groups of researchers, and, based on this analysis, we raised several questions. One of the most challenging questions is, which papers should be selected to measure how relevant the scientific research productivity of a group is? What happens when the researcher switches their workplaces? When evaluating groups, any paper that a member of this group participates must be considered, or only the ones where all members are involved? The number of authors must be used to balance when we are evaluating those groups. Based on the presented questions, the main objective of this work is to identify the main indexes used to measure science by means of evidencing which values are used to compute each index. We aim to understand how are the existent indexes and how can they be or not straightforwardly applied to evaluate groups of researchers. In the research methodology, we conducted an exploratory research in the Google Academic. We used several terms in this exploratory research, such as measurement scientific research, index scientific research, bibliometric scientific research, index groups of researchers, and age indexes for groups of researchers. Then, we produced a summary for the indexes, focusing in what is used to compute each of these indexes. Based on this study, we present the challenges and opportunities observed. The literature review is present in a table with the following columns: the metric or index name, if it's used for individuals only or can be applied for groups, source, the input variables used to calculate each index, and a short description of how each index is calculated. The first metrics are the number of papers and the number of citations. which are the most commonly used to evaluate quality and quantity. These measures are simply counters, thus can be easily applied to groups. The age index is one of the most famous indexes, figures in several platforms. The age index is combining the number of papers and citations of one researcher, returning the total of age papers with at least age citations each. The age 2 index is very similar to the age index, but instead of have age citations for age papers, it's necessary to have age squared to compute each paper. The G index delivers the largest number of G articles that had G squared citations altogether. The A index considers the average citations of an author's publication. The R index is given by the square root of the A index. And the AR index uses the square root of the A index normalized by the age of the articles. The RP index considers the NCIJ, that is calculated by the number of citations divided by the age of the paper and multiplied by a factor of collaboration of an author for the paper. The NCIH factor is then used similarly to the age index. The largest natural number age, such as the top age publications, have at least in average a value of X for their NCIH. The E index considers only the number of citations by pruning the total number of citations by a number of age squared. The E index is used to differentiate researchers with the same age index but different numbers of citations. The HM index considers co-authorships. Through this index, the papers are counted fractionally according to the inverse of the number of an author's rank. The I-10 index is also very used in several platforms, considers the number of papers with at least 10 citations each. The M quotient also considers the time aspect, dividing the age index by the number of years since the first publication. The Crown indicator was proposed by leading university. It is used to compare the number of citations to the average of citations of a given group. This index can be applied to groups using the average citation. The AIF is given by the average number of citations from an author's papers in the last year. The PageRank index considers that the higher the page rank of a paper is, given by the Google algorithm, the higher is its relevance. The age alpha was proposed by Hirsch, the same author of the age index. It considers the leadership of a researcher and is given by the number of papers where a researcher is the main author. Now we present the indexes that apply the same idea of the age index for groups. The age 1 and age 2 indexes were proposed by Mitra. The age 1 is applied in an institutional level, considering all the papers of this institution, the total of age papers with at least age citations each. The age 2 considers the total of N researchers with an age index of at least N each. The successive age index considers the same idea of the age 2 index, considering higher levels, such as regions or countries. The CP index considers the previously presented RP index, number of researchers, N, with a total of N researchers with an RP index of at least N each. The age 1/age 2 ratio is based on the idea that the indexes proposed by Mitra can be calculated in different ways, either considering all the papers of a given author or only the ones that have the institution address in the body of the paper. They also point that two institutions with the same age 2 index might have very different profiles of publications. They propose then dividing the age 2 by the age 1 in order to give a structural indicator for the institution. The age index is the most popular metric to combine quantitative and qualitative aspects for scientific evaluation of research productivity. It provides a number that combines a quantitative measure assessed of productivity with the relevance of the work according to the number of citations received by it. However, even being a very useful index, a few issues have been brought to light in the last years. One of the first issues is related to the quality versus quantity problem. Authors that are focused on survey papers can have a higher number of citations than others that are producing novel knowledge. The most relevant index to overcome this issue is the Crown Indicator, which only considers papers identified as equivalent by certain characteristics, such as area of application, publication type, publication period, among other aspects. Another issue related to the age index is that an author could have a very high age index even after years of his or her retirement, while new researchers with new contributions might be hampered even representing quality and quantity in a still short career. Consequently, a few indexes were proposed to overcome this problem by means of using a time gap to take papers into account, such as the IF metric. Authors with very different numbers of papers and citations can have this very same age index, so the use of self-citation to boost their age indexes also has become a relevant issue. Indeed, the age index in certain fields doesn't represent quite well the reality. A few indexes were proposed by applying a mathematical transformation on the age index, such as considering citation or squared values. When addressing the evaluation of groups, many other problems become clear. The first one is related to which articles should be used to calculate the indexes. Many proposals focus on the institutional level and so consider all the papers of a given institution. However, it is not clear if all the papers of each researcher of the institution are considered, or if there is any kind of special processing for the papers of some researchers who possesses multiple ties or who has changed his or her workplace over the years. This question is important to be considered in the variations of the age index applied to groups, age 1 index, successive, or average, since all of them depend on a set of papers as an input. Other relevant issue not addressed in the previous works is the strength of a group as a whole group. The previous works focus on institutions or university departments, but not on 2 or 3 researchers that are producing science together. There is somehow a union of separate and not a whole group. Based on the issues highlighted, it is possible to observe that some of the gaps pointed out in the existing indexes have already been overcome. However, we believe that one of the most remarkable issues is related to the evaluation of the prestige, quality, and quantity of the knowledge production of a group of researchers based on their publications. Scientific papers and even projects usually are an effort of many people. New measures must take into account the number of researchers, the quality of their work as a group, and the aspects of each researcher and the lead researcher. Another relevant aspect is how connected the researcher is in the group, or how linked their researcher fields are. These questions are important for evaluating research projects and defining, based on the objectives, which groups are most suitable for each line of work. For future work, we intend to propose new metrics to evaluate 1. How scientifically relevant a research group is by proposing a single metric to evaluate both productivity and quality of a group of researchers when considering their work together. 2. How strong is the connection from one research to another, so that it's possible to estimate how close their research fields are. Consequently, the idea is to assess whether a group is more likely to become a joint effort in the same field or an innovative group by merging 2 or more initiatives from different fields. And 3. A new different metric for a group of researchers that combine 2 aspects: how relevant the scientific group is and how strong their connection as a researcher is. In this work, we presented and discussed the main indexes to evaluate the productivity of a researcher in qualitative and quantitative ways. First, we summarized the literature review in a table evidencing how each index is calculated and organizing them in 2 big groups. 1. The ones that evaluate a single research, and 2. others that apply the age index in different ways to evaluate groups of researchers. Based on the review of the literature, we analyze 3 different ways to expand the age index for the group evaluation scenario, using all the institution's work, averaging the age index, and applying the successive age index approach. Then, we pointed out some challenges to evaluate groups of researchers, such as self-citations and the difficulty in selecting which papers should be used to evaluate groups in an institutional level, considering that a researcher can change his or her workplace and also have more than one affiliation. In the end, we also identified some opportunities for assessing research groups, such as evaluating small groups of researchers who work together and considering how linked they and their research fields are among themselves. This is an ongoing work, and the opportunities addressed earlier are being worked on and will be more detailed in experiments to be present in future works. Thanks a lot. Bye!
The dilemma of fake news criminalization on social media is a contemporary theme that discusses issues arising from social transformation driven by social media. This study examines the trend of fake news spreading, coined by fake news, and the reaction of Brazil seeking to stop this dissemination through a criminalization process. The growth in the use of social networks had repercussions on social transformations, changing habits, and daily communication and information exchange. A large volume of information travels on social networks, and so publications are renewed very quickly. What information should be consumed? What to do with the information consumed? These transformations brought conflicts between important conquered rights. On one hand, there is the right of free expression of thought that protects freedom of expression, ensuring that an individual can express his or her opinions without censorship. On the other hand, there is the right to moral integrity to guarantee that constitutional right to people's image, to their privacy, to private life, and to honor. Freedom of expression cannot be confused with the spread of fake news. Fake news endures losses, whether in the political sphere or the sphere of interpersonal relationships. Currently in Brazil, there is a bill to criminalize and punish the spread of false news. The dilemma is the examination of massive information disseminated mainly on social networks. This study begins with bibliographic research on the topic. Searches were carried out in the Scopus and Web of Science databases, aiming to find published studies that discuss fake news. Some books on the subject were consulted, as well as some published research on the subject. These surveys presented some statistics on how this topic is addressed in the world, including data about Brazil. This discussion is the subject of the fake news inquiry that is being processed at the Supreme Court of Brazil, also analyzed in this study, with discussions and questions about the legality of this investigation being observed. 2 aspects of fake news have been observed around the world: its relation to corruption in the political field and its relation to the elections. According to Hendricks and Vastergaard, fake news is an old phenomenon used to gain political power and advantages. These authors report Benjamin Franklin's visit to Paris in 1782, where Benjamin Franklin reportedly published false news to mobilize public opinion in England and Europe. The Global Transparency International movement has published the Global Corruption Barometer in Latin America and the Caribbean. The Global Corruption Barometer presents citizens' opinions and experiences regarding their perspectives on corruption and also on the dissemination of news on the social networks. One of the survey's questions asked participating people if they thought corruption had increased in their countries in the past 12 months. Half of the countries had hates above 50%. Venezuela tops the list of those countries with 87%, followed by Dominican Republic and Peru. Brazil appears in this list in the 7th position of the ranking. One of the conclusions of the Global Corruption Barometer is that the spread of fake news during elections is one of the causes of political corruption. Faustino wrote about the relationship of fake news with elections around the world and also in Brazil. Faustino points to the 2016 American Note election as a great example of the spread of fake news. He points to the use of fake news as a political tool and its purpose in the manipulation of public opinion. This manipulation is achieved with the use of social networks. Hendricks and Westergaard reported that during the 2017 German election, several false histories circulated on social media to foster division and distrust. Faustino reported that the 2018 election in Brazil went through the same problem as the North American elections in 2016. In 2018 presidential elections in Brazil, several fake news was disseminated involving the two main candidates of that election, Jair Bolsonaro and Fernando Haddad. Concerning Brazil, the influence of fake news in the elections was evidenced about the 2018 elections, as was already mentioned. The Brazil Federal Senate released a survey in which it presents social networks as responsible for influencing the vote of 45% of the population. This research pointed out that use of the technological tools has a relevant role in influencing opinions. The Ipsos Institute published a survey in 2018 where 62% of the interviewed Brazilians admitted they have believed that a news story was true until they found it to be false. On this issue, the world's average is 48%. This means Brazil is far above the average in terms of giving credibility to the news without knowing whether it is true or false. The result released in this survey indicates that citizens are aware of false news issue, but that 47% of the Brazilians agreed that it is hard to identify whether the information is true or false when coming from social media. As previously seen with Hendricks and Westergaard, misinformation is made up of a grain of truth within a maze of false information. The tools identified as most influential were Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Twitter. In a survey conducted by Reuters Institute in 2019, Brazil appears with 53% of those who responded to using WhatsApp as the main source of news and discussion, alongside with Malaysia, which was 50%, and South Africa, which was 49%. According to the study presented by Gagliardi and others, WhatsApp is the main channel for sharing fake news, followed by Instagram and Facebook. Also, according to them, the spread of fake news during COVID-19 undermined the credibility of science and global public health institutions. In this study, the Eu Fiscalizo, translated by I Oversee app, was presented. It aims to simplify communication between society and the government in the fighting against fake news in the media, especially on social networks. In the app, it is possible to make complaints, notifications, suggestions, or compliments. To register a complaint, it is necessary to choose among the options a type of entertainment, TV stations, streaming, cinema, electronic games, shows, advertisements, and social media. The app was designed by the researcher Claudia Gagliardi from the National Study of Public Health of the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, known as Fiocruz, which is a public foundation linked to the Ministry of Health of Brazil. The Brazilian Federal Police, which is responsible for investigating electoral crimes, carried out several police investigations to combat the practice of electoral crimes. Searches were conducted to collect publications on the internet regarding this type of police operation. The information collected includes 87 operations that took place between 2010 and 2017. According to the research, in the years 2016 and 2017, there was an increase of the number of operations by the federal police on electoral crimes. From a total of 87 police operations, 75 took place in the past 2 years, which reveals a growing concern about this issue. Also, in those years, there was the largest numbers of arrests, with 83, 69 arrests in 2016 and 23 arrests in 2017. In the period ranging from 2010 to 2017, 144 people were taken to testify in cases involving electoral crimes. What is the role of government in facing the phenomenon of fake news and the resulting losses? How can countries act to mitigate the harmful effects of the spread of fake news? All this information pointed out in research and news shows that the concern with the phenomenon of fake news dictated the agenda of countries worldwide. It was no different in Brazil, which has been also reacting to the phenomenon. The state must place itself between individual freedom and the collective social order to prevent personal interests from invading and disturbing the collective social space overlapping it. It is possible to observe in the timeline the events that involve Brazil's efforts to combat fake news. In 1995, the Internet Steering Committee was created in Brazil, an advisory body that acts on the integration of Internet-related activities in the country. This committee holds regular meetings to address issues such as establishing strategic and technical guidelines on the functioning of the Internet. In 2009, Resolution 003 of 2009 emerged from ordinary meetings of the Internet Steering Committee. This resolution establishes 10 principles related to Internet governance in Brazil. These principles come to be known as the Decalogue of Internet. Among these principles are freedom, privacy, and human rights, democratic and collaborative governance, universality, and respect for cultural diversity. In 2014, concerned with the regulation of principles for the use of the Internet in the country, the law is known as Marco Civil da Internet appears in Brazil. The previous launch of the Internet Decalogue served as a solid source for the emergence of the Marco Civil law, which establishes principles, rights, and duties for the use of the Internet in Brazil. In 2018, the General Law for Protection of Personal Data came into force in Brazil. This law placed Brazil in a group of countries that have their law to defend citizens' privacy. For some writers, such as Faustino, the General Law on Protection of Personal Data meets the constitutional principles of freedom of expression and privacy. This 2020 bill is currently under discussion. The Bill of Law 2630 of 2020 deals with freedom, responsibility, and transparency on the Internet. It will establish rules on transparency in social networks. The draft of this bill several times mentions untagged content, referring to the prohibition of anonymity in the dissemination of information. The text proposed in this bill makes it clear that the objective is to make the source of any dissemination of news identifiable. The purpose of these measures is to combat disinformation. Some of these penalties include warning, fine, temporary suspension, and prohibition from exercising the activity. With this, it is clear that the bill intends to criminalize the spread of fake news. The bill has already been approved in the Federal Senate and is currently waiting to be discussed at the Chamber of Deputies. In March 2019, after rumors of offense addressed to the Federal Supreme Court, the president at the time opened a criminal investigation to examine what happened. The Supreme Federal Court is the highest court of justice in Brazil. The controversy soon arose. Is it possible for the Federal Supreme Court to investigate crimes against itself, being itself a judge? This controversy also involved questioning the legality of the fake news inquiry, as no action was taken that had a real threat to the highest court. The controversy over the legality of the fake news inquiry involved political parties, members of the legislative branch, and even civil society. Legal scholars in Brazil share opinions about the criminal system adopted by the country, as the Supreme Court's understanding is that Brazil adopts the accusatory system. This is told in the majority among the indoctrinators. In the end, is this initiative legal? This is the question. Journalist André Borges Oliano published an article at Instituto Politeia presenting arguments to justify why the Supreme Court's initiative is illegal. The arguments were presented in 5 items. The purpose of the investigation is undefined. Minister's appointment violates free distribution. Lack of Supreme Court attribution for the case. Opening in the STF violates the accusatory system, and the investigation violates freedom of speech. The discussion about the legality of the fake news inquiry initiated at the Supreme Court reached the presidency of the Republic of Brazil, involving President Jair Bolsonaro himself. Some initiatives can be seen in this research that were attempts to combat the spread of fake news. The initiatives involve the public and private sectors in addition to civil society itself. Given that the fake news are at the center of discussion around the world, it may be that the development of measures to combat fake news are evolving. The Superior Electoral Court signed agreements in 2018 with political parties as a measurement to combat fake news. It also partnered with political marketing experts to promote transparency in elections. As a way of tackling fake news in the elections, the Superior Electoral Court held in 2018 the first international seminar, Fake News and Elections. In 2019, it held the second meeting with the same name. This last event in 2019 was supported by the European Union and brought together experts on the topic of fake news. In the discussions of this fourth panel, it was clear that the evolution of tools to combat fake news involves the use of artificial intelligence. The creation of the Fake News Check Panel is another initiative. It was created to make the population aware of the dangers and losses of fake news. This action was an initiative taken in April 2019 by representatives of the National Council of Justice, associations of the judiciary and the higher courts and the press. A campaign using the hashtag #FakeNewsNo was carried out in the dissemination of posts in social networks, in videos and texts. 2 million tweets impressions were recorded in 1 month of this campaign. Other hashtags were used, such as fake news and fake news perigo real. In Brazil, the Ministry of Health has taken the initiative to make available a WhatsApp contact number to combat fake news on health. The initiative aims to collect suspicious messages from the population. Thus, viral information will be investigated by technical areas. After analysis, responses classified as false or true are published. A count of 84 news reports was analyzed during 2020 and had already been released by the Ministry of Health. On the Ministry of Health website, it is possible to check the list of news classified by the labels. For example, non-quality mask distributed by the Ministry of Health, fake news. Cough prevents coronavirus, fake news. Smoking increases the risk of severe form of coronavirus. It's true. These are some examples of this. From what was studied, it was found that fake news can have a detrimental effect on elections around the world. The analysis also indicates that Brazilians are susceptible to the diffusion of fake news, making Brazil a fertile ground for the spread of fake news. This study presented several aspects of how this theme invaded the Brazilian daily agenda. The study also looked at how fake news can act as an instrument of corruption. To combat fake news, countries must establish a work agenda that prioritizes political integrity in the preservation of the democratic system. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody! I will present the paper The Role of Artificial Intelligence in Smart Cities, Systematic Literature Review. Cities are facing with a lot of challenges these days. Growing urban populations, environmental pollution, climate change, infrastructure breakdown and lack of resources are just a few of them. Such challenges require novel solutions, giving rise to an encouraging concept of a smart city. By employing smart solutions, existing day-to-day scenarios in the cities can be significantly improved. With the rapid development of artificial intelligence, opportunities emerge to improve public services. The rise in interest in artificial intelligence and smart cities, its potentials and issues, has led many researchers to contribute to the field, resulting in a sharp increase in the number of published studies. Although this increase provides more insights and greater body of knowledge in a specific area, we as users need more time to identify relevant studies in a particular case. Thus, this paper presents an attempt to systematically review the relevant literature on the topic of artificial intelligence smart cities and serve as a starting point for further research in the field. A systematic literature review was done to formally synthesize primary studies relevant to the already described area of interest. Covert-Peterson, 2015. It differs from non-systematic studies as it is methodologically framed with a series of well-defined steps. A predetermined protocol includes identification, selection, evaluation, and analysis of relevant studies that are eligible for review, going beyond limitations of traditional reviews. Databases Web of Science and Scopus were selected as sources. The keywords used to search for the papers are artificial intelligence and smart city or smart cities, but limited to scientific papers written in English. Another limitation is that alternative and related keywords, such as computational intelligence, were not considered at this stage. Visualization of the terms from the papers from the Web of Science database search is presented in Figure 1 to get a general overview of the results. It was created using the WOS Viewer tool based on the set of general data of the papers and abstracts. 4 clusters are revealed, each marked with a different color. The size of a circle indicates the frequency of occurrence of a particular term in a dataset and the length of the line between 2 terms, their relationship. The shorter length of the line between the 2 terms indicates a stronger connection, confirming the relevance of big data technologies in artificial intelligence. The literature sampling procedure is illustrated in Figure 2 with the numbers of papers handled in each phase. The initial number of papers was 360 from Web of Science database and 230 from Scopus. There was less than 5% of the papers that could not be accessed. The papers indexed in both database duplicates were excluded from one. In the first round of selection, all of the papers with abstracts precisely corresponding to the research topics, abstracts containing both keywords or even some of the known subcategories, methods, or algorithms were kept. For example, all papers did not contain artificial intelligence or smart city or smart cities in the abstract, but instead contained keywords such as smart healthcare or smart transportation system, in addition to one of the keywords related to artificial intelligence such as supervised learning, reinforcement learning, and similar were left in the sample. The second round of selection eliminated all false positive papers that passed the first round of selection, but after reviewing the rest of the text and graphics did not meet the stated criteria. The process of forward and backwards checking citations resulted in including 9 additional papers in the sample for review. The final number of papers after the sampling procedure is 94. Papers are published between 2015 and 2020, which we can see in Figure 3. Although the initial list of papers contained papers published earlier, though not before 2012, many papers did not meet the presented criteria for the first and second selection rounds. Looking at the final list of selected papers, in 2019 a total of 39 papers were published, i.e. 3.25 per month, while in 2020 a total of 25 papers were published during the first 6 months, i.e. 4.17 per month. The growth in the number of papers is not surprising, given that artificial intelligence is a rapidly evolving discipline. The largest number of papers, 17 of them, was published in the journal IEEE Access, which we can see in Figure 4. This is followed by IEEE Internet of Things journal with 9 papers, Applied Sciences with 6 papers, Sensors with 5 papers, and Sustainability with 3 papers. These 5 journals published 40 out of 94 papers, which is 43%. The remaining 55 papers were published in other journals with 1 or 2 papers per journal. Due to the diversity in the content of the final list of papers, several categories were created. The 3 main categories are general role, applications area, and challenges. Each of these categories refers to artificial intelligence in smart cities, i.e. the role of artificial intelligence in smart cities, the application of artificial intelligence in smart cities, and the challenges that may arise from the use of artificial intelligence in smart cities. These categories are further divided into subcategories. Category general role is divided into ethical aspects, security, data management, and other. Category application areas is divided into subcategories mobility, environment, surveillance, energy, smart home, healthcare, education, and other. Category challenges is divided into subcategories security and ethical issues. Figure 5 shows us the popularity of artificial intelligence used in mobility systems with as many as 20 papers. The gap between the prevalent subcategory in terms of the application area, mobility, and the two succeeding surveillance and energy, equally represented by 12 papers per subcategory, demonstrates the interest in artificial intelligence in the context of smart mobility well. This is followed by health and environment application areas with the same number of papers, 11, smart home with 6 papers, education with 3 papers, and 8 papers on various topics in the subcategory other. And now we will say shortly about studies of general role of artificial intelligence in smart cities. Many ethical considerations have to be taken into account in the implementation of smart city solutions. Collecting large amounts of data, public and personal, using a variety of Internet of Things devices brings attention to issues related to the privacy of collected data. As artificial intelligence develops faster, new and smart solutions for cities and its citizens are developing at the same rate, but also leading to the development of associated tools used for malicious purpose. Security solutions based on artificial intelligence algorithms are devised to ensure safe and reliable use of smart solutions. Issues associated with data management stem from the fact that Internet of Things devices collect audio, video, images, or text data that is difficult to manage with traditional algorithms. As we said before, application area of artificial intelligence in smart cities are various. Smart mobility is subcategory where artificial intelligence is used frequently. Using artificial intelligence, scientists can identify the causes of environmental problems, issue prior warnings, and organize resources for rescue. Also, artificial intelligence algorithms can be used for preventing crime, analyzing data, and detecting behavioral anomalies, and for energy management. Many applications in healthcare have also been presented, including biometric identification, disease detection, monitoring the condition of patient remotely. Artificial intelligence techniques can improve e-learning systems, optimize educational content based on individual approach. In smart home, artificial intelligence can be used to predict indoor climate conditions and different anomalies. Challenges of artificial intelligence in smart cities can be shown in storing large datasets collected from different Internet of Things devices which are unprotected from cyber attacks. Furthermore, due to the ability of artificial intelligence to analyze large datasets, in specific cases, some control and decision-making processes have been taken over by algorithms. And last but not least, unethical behavior of autonomous vehicles that make independent decisions. At the end, concluding remarks. 94 of the papers were identified as relevant. All papers from the selected sample were published from 2015 to mid-2020. Categories and subcategories have been defined, and the papers categorized considering its primary focus. There is a disproportion between the number of papers in different categories, with the majority representing specific solutions for the application of artificial intelligence in smart cities, and minimum number of those that cover the area of challenges and barriers to using artificial intelligence in smart cities. A popular topic is smart mobility, addressing improvement of parking, traffic management and safety. On the other hand, the lack of papers dealing with ethical and safety issues does not mean that such problems do not exist, but that either there is no interest from researchers or that these problems have not yet been sufficiently researched. The main shortcomings of the paper are the limited number of databases searched, only Web of Science and Scopus, and possible bias of the authors in selecting the final list of papers for the review. Even though increasing the number of sources would significantly increase the number of duplicates, it would improve the quality of the literature review by offering a more representative view of publications on the topic. This work has been supported by the Croatian Science Foundation under the project User-Oriented Process Redesign and Information System Modeling, a case of smart city services. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.
Hello, my name is André Gonçalves and I'm here to explain our paper. The title is Feature Importance Investigation for Estimating COVID-19 Infection by Random Forest Algorithm. The authors are André Vinícius Gonçalves, Dione J. Silva Schneider, Fernanda Vargas Amaral, Leandro Pereira Garcia, and Gustavo Medeiros de Araújo. In December 2019, a new coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2 was recognized in the city of Wuhan, China, and spread quickly to other countries in the world. In January 2020, the World Health Organization declared a public health emergency of international importance, and in March, the COVID-19 pandemic. At the beginning of October 2020, there are already more than 33 million confirmed cases and more than 1 million deaths from the disease. Laboratory diagnosis is an important tool for diagnosis, as well for follow-up, evaluation, and evolution of the case. However, it's important to use the resource rationally in conducting diagnostic tests. Therefore, artificial intelligence techniques have been used to predict the diagnosis of COVID-19. Then, we model a machine learning algorithm to estimate the infection of an individual, and we develop an investigation to assess the main features that can determine COVID-19 infection. The main goal of our work is to analyze which features must contribute to the diagnosis of suspect cases using the classification technique. We collected and analyzed data from the public health system in the capital of Santa Catarina, a state in Brazil. The methodology, it was divided into 4 steps. 1. Data selection and extraction. 2. Data preprocessing and feature engineering. 3. Hypermetrization feature selection. And 4. Model validation. They can be seen in figure. In the first steps, the bases were selected. Then, data preprocessing was performed to leave the base adjust. In this way, some scores were adopted, others were transformed, and new ones were created. The step 3, the hypermetrizations and feature selections process was performed, and then the filter of the best features in the base was made. Finally, the validation prediction was performed, and the results of the confusion matrix are called. In the first steps, the database used has been set corresponding to 1,930 report cases of COVID-19 in the period between February 15, 20 and May 25, 2020. The database comes from 3 sources. 1. Anonymized data on suspect and confirmed cases resident in Florianopolis. 2. Demographic data of the 49 health regions that make up the municipality, and data on the mobility represented by traffic flow in the city. The database 1 contains individual data on the diagnosis, sex, age, skin color, date of onset of symptoms and patient symptoms, pain through dyspnea, fever, and cough. The database 2 contains demographic data for rough territories, for example, total number of inhabitants, and by sex, number of people by years of schooling, among others. There are 49 territories and 104 subterritories that correspond to regional division of the city. The database 3 provides data on the average daily traffic on 4 major avenues in the city. All records with the value missing in attributes of symptoms and diagnosis were removed. Then, the categorical attributes were converted to numerical ones using the one-hot encoding and feature hashing. The number of active infected people in each health territory was calculated. It was proposed to include the number of people discarded and removed by health territories. Furthermore, it was include the rate of people infected by number inhabitants of the respective territory, as well as the rate of discarded and removed. Finally, the data were normalized. As there is an imbalance in the amount of data between the discarded and confirmed cases, the sample was balanced using the undersampling technique. In the training stage, cross-validation was adopted. Hypermetrizations was performed using a random combination of parameters in each tuning process. Accuracy is chosen as the maximization score. After this, the feature selection was performed considering the values of permutation importance as criterion for access. The criterion used was the selecting only those resources with the value greater than 0. Thus, resources with values below this limit have been removed from the database. In the last step of the process, which the algorithm trains and configured with the best parameters that fit the model, the algorithm was validated with the test base to assess its prediction. The steps 3 and 4 were repeated 100 times and the results for each were started. So, the data were used to calculate the mean and standard deviation of evaluation metrics and permutation features importance. The parameters of the random forest and SVM are present in tables below, as well as the possible value ranges. And parameters described in the last table relates to the general sets of the environment. The metrics used in the analysis of the model to assess performance were accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity. The data samples were obtained by running the algorithm repeatedly, and they are present below in the form of average of standard deviation. See the results in the tables below. The random forest was the best. It had a mean accuracy of 0.80 of the trained set and 0.79 on the test set. The mean sensitivity was 0.83 in the train base and 0.84 in the test base. And the mean specificity was 0.77 in each for the two bases. The SVM was worse than the random forest algorithm. It had a mean accuracy of 0.76 on the trained set and 0.75 on the test set. The mean sensitivity was 0.80 in each of the two bases, and the mean specificity was 0.73 and 0.72 in the train and test respectively. Notice that random forest had better results on the train and test. Therefore, it was used to assess permutation importance of features. These were the results of permutation importance of the 20 most significant features. In graph, you can see every feature is most important. There are notification dates, confirmed rates territory 14 days, fever, cough, confirmed territory 14 days, symptoms start date, discarded rate territory, sore throat, age, discarded territory, age above 91, removed territory, traffic mean lag 1, traffic mean lag 2, and screen math 2. Note the several symptoms features appeared, as well new features created in the features engineering process. The investigation started with the database containing 175 resources, which after going through pre-process increased to 228. The most important features was the notification date. All some features appeared among the 20 most meaningful, with the exception of dyspnea. These facts corroborate with the research that investigates the symptoms and indicate fever, cough, and sore throat among some of the most common ones. Mobility features also meaningful. There were 14 features to represent traffic on the city, and 4 of them were among the most important features. The confirmed territory 14 days, the rate discarded territory, and the rate removed territory features were even more expressive and were among the 10 most important. In this way, the factor health region was very important in the correct classification of the diagnosis. The results of the model were somewhat satisfactory. Coping with the research developed in other work, there is an improvement of 15% in the accuracy measured in the final test stage. This measure may be associated with the addition of new variables, symptoms, and those confirmed, discarded, and removed related to the health territory. The present work shows an investigation about the feature importance in the prediction diagnostic model for cases of COVID-19 using the classification technique with machine learning. The permutation importance method was used to assess the impact of features on the results. Among the 228 variables, the most relevant are the date of notification, the rate of confirmed in the territory of the last 14 days, the rate of discarded and removed from the territory, age, flow variables traffic, and addition to the attributes of fever, cough, and sore throat. The Random Forest performed better compared SVM. Accuracy had a mean of 78.19%, whereas sensitivity had 83.5% and specificity 75.50% of cases. Therefore, the research conducted has shown that there is a feasible option in the process of underdiagnosis COVID-19. I leave here the reference used in these presentations. Thank you.
Hi, I am Daniel San Martin Pascal Filho, and I will present our paper, a MapReduce-based method for achieving active technological surveillance in big data environments. Throughout history, technological changes have created, transformed, and destroyed markets. The reduction of time between different innovation cycles increases complexity and the effort required to maintain an up-to-date picture of a whole scenario. Technological surveillance, or TS, gained prominence as a structured monitoring process. Nevertheless, maintaining a monitoring system to evaluate real big data scenarios became a challenge for organizations. This work proposed a method to identify the use of existing technology in big data scenarios by answering the following research question: how to automatically identify a set of technologies of interest whose use is increasing in popularity on web portals. TS arose from the need to monitor the internal and external environments of organizations in a structured and systematic way to map possible changes in technological scenarios. Many authors proposed patent scientific papers and web application monitoring methods. However, these proposed methods limit the field of monitoring. But today, most organizations are immersed in big data scenarios and need a new approach for this. Between key reasons to adopt TS are the need to anticipate changes to avoid competitive disadvantage, cost reduction, and the need to innovate. From the point of view of information science, according to Buckland view, information in TS can be understood as a knowledge and the analyzed document as things that can reduce uncertainties. An important concept is domain. A domain can be understood as a group that shares an ontology, undertakes common research or work, and also engages in discourse or communication, formally or informally. This research uses information produced by experts from a particular industry sector to model ontology containing the key technologies and critical resources to their area. Another concept is big data. TS system needed to deal with thousands of unstructured digital documents, as well as huge volumes of data that, due to the high level of information digitalization, keep growing. Among the several existing big data definitions proposed by authors, in this work we use the definition of 5 V's, in which each V describes one feature as volume, variety, velocity, veracity, and value. In technological surveillance, data is only useful if it has value and can be checked for accuracy. In this context, MapReduce is an important concept. MapReduce was conceived in Google as a solution to optimize its web search engine in 2003. It enables parallel processing in large collections of data through computer clusters. The map function receives a collection of input data and apply a function on them to identify terms in text, for example, generating a new collection. The reduce function receives a collection as input and applies another function on them to sum similar terms, for example, providing a reduction in the size of the collection. This work is applied research. Regarding the objectives, it conducts explanatory research. Also, it uses a quantitative approach when data are analyzed and qualitative when validating the proposal with specialists. Experimental and bibliographic procedures gave a theoretical foundation, leading knowledge to the authors. The proposed method is based on TS cycle presented in Sanchi Torres and Palop Maro's work of 2002. The method defines a clear sequence of steps to create an automated system to identify predefined technologies and assess their popularity in large volume of documents collected from formal sources of digital information. In planning step, the domain analysis process is proposed to build ontologies containing the technologies to monitor and their superclasses. The sources of digital information, such as web portals, should be evaluated and defined. The collection step is responsible to automate the collection of publications from predefined sources with web crawlers or APIs. All the collected data should be stored in their raw form. The organization step extracts the content from publication and converts them into structured data types in order to allow further manipulation. In addition, the duplicated documents are removed and the remaining ones are indexed in appropriate databases. But the extracted data still represent a challenge for the analysis process due to their high dimensionality, composed by useless information in this big data context. In this sense, the intelligence step uses a MapReduce algorithm to identify key technologies and generate a data subset with less dimensionality in order to enable TS system to cope with big data. Once the volume of technology has been quantified, it's possible to build time series that correlate mentions of the technology identified with their publication dates. Next, graphs that summarize the calculation performed can be generated to facilitate the analysis of the specialists. Finally, in the communication step, users must be notified of the result in an automated manner by email, automatic updates, or sending reports. To validate the proposed method, a prototype was developed. It implemented its steps and activities. The furniture and wood sector was chosen as a scenario because it's one of the key sectors in the economy of the Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, as pointed by a study of Federation of Industries of the State of Santa Catarina, FIESC. In the planning stage, a domain analysis was carried out on the furniture and wood sector. The ontology modeling for the sector was done in the Protege tool. Additionally, FIESC specialists suggest 4 web portals for crawling. For the collection step, a set of web crawlers was developed in the Python language with the Beautiful Soup library. After collected, publication titles, texts, and dates are stored in MongoDB database. In the organization step, the publication URLs are stored in a collection called crawler news URLs to control the crawling process, and publication data are stored in another collection called publication. In the intelligence step, a MapReduce algorithm written in JavaScript is executed in the MongoDB where. The map function uses a regular expression to look for technologies mentions in the documents, and the reduce function adds the same terms found, returning the total value associated with the label term count. The prototype performs an augmented Dick-Fuller test to help the evaluation of a variation in the number of technologies mentioned, indicating a possible mature technology. In the end, graphs are built and a polynomial of order 2 was adjusted in order to facilitate the visualization and analysis of the specialists. Here, we have a code snippet with the output from MapReduce processing. In order to communicate the result to specialists, the system creates a report containing a summary of main data, such as number of documents captured and 10 most mentioned technologies and the associated charts. As experimental result, we have in the collection stage web crawlers were constructed to scrape publications dated between June 1st, 2017 and June 1st, 2018. The table shows the number of publications collected from web portals. As total, we have 2,918 publications collected. During the intelligence stage, we incorporated indicators such as the number of documents in which the monitored technologies were mentioned and the volume of documents that quoted each class of the key technologies of the ontology. In this way, it's possible to see which technologies and classes were most cited in the period. But there are obvious difficulties to evaluate trends using graphics. To overcome that, the behavior of each technology was separately evaluated using Dickey-Fuller test. Thus, it's possible to have support to assess whether the key technology is becoming popular or not. In the figure, it's possible to see an example of monitoring of a biomass term. The test indicates a significant variation. As final considerations, this paper proposed an automated method for identification of key technologies in specialized information sources with 5 steps: planning, collecting, organization, intelligence, and communication. A prototype was developed in order to validate this proposal. It identified and quantified key technologies from 2,918 publications collected from 4 specialized web portals suggested by specialists. The proposed method for identifying the use of existing technologies in big data scenarios by means of the structured reports, graphs, and tables is the answer to our research question. As feature work, we suggest the creation of a substep of the collection phase, which is capable of recommending new possible key technologies to be monitored based on text mining techniques. Another possible evolution would be to extract geographic data from the collected data in order to check the dispersion of technologies on the map, as well as their intersection with data come from other sources of information. Thank you for your attention.
Hello everyone, my name is Vinicius and I'll be presenting the work Interactive Domain-Specific Knowledge Graphs from Text, a COVID-19 implementation. So my presentation is divided into 3 sections, first one being introduction, followed by the methods, and ended up with the preliminary results. So the the Shannon's mathematical theory of communication is understood as the information science debut. And ever since its debut, many other subfields have emerged, information retrieval being one of them. And at some point, the information retrieval was considered the main core of information science. The information retrieval itself started in the 1970s, and its focus was on creating retrieval indexes and the physical location of informations. Currently, the focus is on the digital information processing. And the use of knowledge graphs to represent human knowledge and therefore as a way of retrieving information has been receiving attention recently both from academy and the industry. But when we talk about knowledge graphs, the high complexity that it's related with knowledge graphs algorithms limits the number of applications that are able of benefiting from such advances. So you have good results, but these results are limited because you need to have a very high technical knowledge in order to make use of such gains. And even though accessibility and usability are not listed in the future research directions of knowledge graphs. On the other hand, we have domain specialists that could benefit from use of knowledge graphs because their information necessity are not met through traditional information engines and frameworks, and they also normally don't have any programming skills that are necessary in order to make use of knowledge graphs algorithms, or to build their own pipelines, or to create tools that would allow them to do so. So, when we list a few things that we have discussed so far, that domain specialists cannot assimilate through human cognition the information in the same piece that the information is created, and that regular knowledge frameworks are not sufficient to fill the information needs, and on top of that normally domain specialists do not have the technical skills that are needed in order to make use of algorithms and technologies that would allow them to deal with a larger number of documents of information so that they could fulfill their needs. We ended up at an information problem that is the gap between the creation of information and the assimilation by domain specialists. The authors do not believe that this gap will ever come to zero, but the authors do believe that we can create tools and frameworks that will help this gap to be narrow this gap. And with that in mind, we've conducted a literature review, which is described in the paper, and we found one similar work according to the criteria that was used in this review. The work that was considered to be similar is the MyDig, personalized illicit domain-specific knowledge discovery with no programming. It was developed at the Information Science Institute of University of Southern California, and it's a framework that allows investigative domain specialists to build and interact with their own knowledge graphs from web pages. As one would expect, you will find both similarities and difference between the similar work and the work presented here. The main similarities are the problem to be solved, which is the gap between the information creation and assimilations. MyDig also acknowledges this gap and tries to make it narrower. The second main similarity is that they also acknowledges that the advances in the information processing knowledge representation, so the information processing through knowledge graphs, increases the complexity that in order to make use of these frameworks, and this limits the number of people and institutions and research groups that can benefit from this. And finally, the last main similarity is that they propose a web interface for the domain specialist as a solution. When we look into the differences, the main one is the user profile. The MyDig work, as the title already specifies, focus on investigative domain, And when we talk about domain specialists in the investigative domain, they normally already know what they are looking for since they are in an investigative context. So maybe they are looking for some kind of gun, drug dealing, human traffic, but they already have a more defined idea of what they are looking for, and therefore their framework is focused from this kind of users. While the one that I'm presenting here is focused more on creating a tool that would allow a domain specialist to have a general view of the information that he's dealing with. So for example, we have the result of research on a scientific base, and we want to understand what concepts are related with what in this corpus that we have. So we have this user profile difference. The way that the knowledge graph is built also differs. The MyDig was created from web pages. So the graph is created from web pages, while the one that I'm presenting here is created from text. And the availability of the work, the MyDig is not fully open source or online. You cannot use it. The engine that creates the knowledge graphs are maintained by a private company, and it's not on their GitHub, and there is no link that you can test it. And I intend to make it the authors intend to make the solution open source. So when we come to the methods part of the presentation, I think it's better to have a look at the high-level architecture first, to have a more clear vision of what this framework intends to do. So on the left side of the figure, we have a user that has a corpus of interests. Like I said before, this could be the result of a search on the Web of Science or Scopus or any other scientific database, or just a corpus that he gathered of the interest. Then the user will be able to upload this corpus through a web interface, and this web interface will communicate with a back-engine model that uses machine learning algorithms in order to get the text from the corpus and create a knowledge graph. This knowledge graph will be then returned to the web interface, where the user will be able to interact with the knowledge graph created from the corpus that he uploaded. So this is the high-level architecture of the idea. We talked a lot about knowledge graphs, but we haven't defined it yet. So a possible definition is that a knowledge graph is a structured representation of facts in the form of entities. And on the figure, we have an example of a knowledge graph about Albert Einstein. On the left-hand side, we have the triplets that forms the graph. And if we look at the first row, we have Albert Einstein as the head entity, born in as the relation, German Empire as the tail entity. So it's an example of how a triplet is stored. On the right side of the figure, we have the visual representation of this graph, and we can see that we have some aesthetic aspects that we can use in order to better understand the graph. So we have blue for people, for example. So when we look at the graph, we can understand it better, and the persons that Albert Einstein was related from. So this helps in a visual way. But when we talk about creating a knowledge graph from text, we are talking about natural language processing, and we need to specify which tasks we want to perform. We need an algorithm that will perform these tasks in order to create a knowledge graph. There are two tasks that we need to be performed. The first one is name entity recognition, or NER, and the second one is entity linking. When we talk about name entity recognition, we are talking about labeling sequences of words in the text, which are name of things, such as persons, companies, etc. So for example, we could have the statement, Armstrong landed on the moon. On this statement, Armstrong refers to a person and Mon to a location. So we have a NER annotated statement. If we look on the second example, the report on the IV-Pox virus is the current priority. We have another example of a statement that was submitted to a NER process, and the entities were annotated in the statement. So this is what NER is. We're just trying to label the names of things, persons, companies, and etc. The other task that is needed that we need to perform is called entity linking, which shortly we could define as finding a relation between two entities. So this example taken from Wikipedia, it's a very easy to understand what is entity linking. So we have the statement, Paris is the capital of France. So we know that Paris is related to France and that the relation is the capital of. So we can connect these two entities that represents locations through the relation is the capital of. So we need to do that with medical texts. And now we arrive at the final part of the presentation where we'll talk about the preliminary results. As I specified in the article, we are presenting the prototype that it's not fully finished, but we have a few results. So in order to extract the triplets, the authors created a workflow based on the unified medical language system that is in medical ontology, so that when we extract the entities and their relations, we need to extract it from a knowledge base. We need to have a source of where do these entities come from. In this case, we are using the UMLS, which is a medical ontology. The workflow was built with the framework SciSpace, which is a Python natural language processing package for scientific texts, and there is the link in the article as well for a notebook with an example of the data processing. So what is the objective of this data processing? We will have a text. This is a real text extracted from a COVID-19 research papers dataset, and we want to extract the triplets that are the entities that are related to each other from this text. So we have a text, and the table, the right side bottom of the slide, are the examples of triplets that were found in the text. So with these triplets, we can create an interactive knowledge graph. So we are trying to do this basically to allow a domain specialist that has a corpus of interest to investigate how one document is related to the corpus of interest. So when we put everything together, the current state prototype that has a link to access on the paper has this interface. We are developing the interface that will enable the domain specialist to upload its corpus, but we have an example corpus of the related to the COVID-19, related to an example corpus of COVID-19 research papers, and we have three main elements. The first one is a drop-down menu to select the document, and it has a text search feature, so you can type and it will show the titles of the documents, the papers with the terms that you are looking for. The second item is a table with the triplets found in the text, and the third one is an interactive knowledge graph. It's an interactive graph with the entities found in the text and the entities found in the other texts in the other corpus. So the user can see which entity is related to what. And we added some visual aesthetics to better understand the graph. So we have color for different types of entities, and we have the line, the link between the entities size shows the greater it is, the more times that relation appeared in the corpus that was uploaded. This is what I have prepared to present, and thank you everyone for the attention. These are my contacts that you can reach me with no restrictions.
A roadmap for composing automatic literature reviews. A test mining approach. Authors: Eugênio Monteiro da Silva Jr. and Moisés Lima Dutra, from Federal University of Santa Catarina. Introduction. The scientist production keeps growing at an accelerated rate. According to the STM report 2018, at August 2018, the English language peer-reviewed journal published together 3 million papers per year. The large number of publications on certain topics means that writing literature reviews consumes many hours of human work. The evolution of the natural language processing, NLP, allows in us the process of creating literature reviews. This paper presents an overview of the current scenario of automation of literature reviews. We propose a general pipeline resulting from the combination of artificial intelligence techniques in order to highlight the challenges and possibilities. There are several types of literature reviews, like state-of-the-art, with the most current research, emerging trends, research priorities in a particular field, and systematic literature reviews, undertaken according to the explicit procedures, gather all available knowledge in a given topic, identify research gaps, and is replicable. There is no consensus regarding how many steps the production of systematic review can be divided into. Several different proposals in the regard can be found in the literature. While some authors propose only 3 steps, others suggest 15 steps. In this work, we consider 4 steps: searching, extensive search to locate relevant papers in the electronic database; screening, for reducing the collection to only the documents that are really relevant; mapping, understand the research activity in a given area; and synthesizing, that summarizes the results. The process is both creative and technical. Technical steps can be performed automatically. There are standards for development of systematic reviews, like PRISMA, Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analysis, and PICO, Patient Intervention, Comparison and Outcome. This paper presents a test mining approach. What is test mining? Test data mining, or test mining, is a derivation of data mining that, instead of working with numerical and structured data, works with textual data. The main difference between regular data mining and test mining is that in the test mining, the patterns are extracted from natural language tests rather than from structured databases of facts. Databases are designed for software applications to process them automatically. Text is written for people to read. There are no programs that can read text as humans do, and there is no evidence that they will exist in the near future. Many researchers think it will require a full simulation of how the mind works before we can write programs that can read the way people do. However, there is a research field called computational linguistics, also known as natural language processing (NLP), that is making great progress in carrying out small subtasks in the text analysis. For example, it's relatively easy to write a program to extract sentences from a paper or book that, when shown to a human reader, appear to summarize its content. The main methods of NLP used in systematic reviews are text classification and data extraction. The classification methods look for models that can automatically associate documents with previously defined categories. The data extraction methods try to identify parts of the text or individual words, numbers that correspond to a variable of interest. Scientific production is mostly present in textual form. Artificial intelligence techniques, especially aimed at processing textual data, have a wide field of application to aid in production of literature reviews. Automating the creation of systematic literature reviews. Since the production of essays are both creative and technical, it is expected that all stages considered technical are subject to automation. Machine learning has been used for this purpose since 2005. The methods currently considered most relevant to support systematic reviews are automatic term recognition, text clustering, text classification, and text summarization. It's important to highlight that all the technical steps of the review process can be automated through some computational techniques, with the main objective of reducing the human workload. Challenges and opportunities. At the search step, text mining can help by suggesting possible query terms. The improvement in the set of search terms can expand the coverage of the results. At the screening step, machine learning can be used to prioritize the documents for manual screening or automatically classify according to a training set manually labeled. The main limitation is what the point it's safe to interrupt the manual screening. Another way to find relevant studies to a literature review is by citation mining. Databases APIs provide information about citation of the index paper. Integration of content-based methods with citation-based methods can help to find relevant studies. At the data extraction step, once the set of relevant studies are identified, the next step is to extract the useful information. One of the most time-consuming tasks in a systematic review. There are examples like XXT and robot reviewer. One obstacle is the lack of training data. The last step of a systematic review that can be assisted by a text mining technique is the synthesis of information. The multi-document summarization that condenses the information that was discovered and classified. If the reviewer have previously produced a cluster of documents, then it makes sense to apply the MDS, since documents in a cluster can have something in common. Consequently, the results would be meaningful. Finally, there are the natural language generation, NLG, technologies, which can be used to automatically write specific paragraphs of the review, such as description of type of documents retrieved, results of the evaluation, and summary of the conclusions. Currently existing techniques are not able to produce perfect tests like those written by humans. However, the automatically generated test can serve as basis for the test to be written manually by reviewers, avoiding errors in data transfer from multiple sources. Importantly, this kind of technology still has a lot to be improved. Thereby, in search for more integrated tools to automate systematic review, researchers should be aware of the next test generation methods that are emerging. It is the main contribution of this paper, a pipeline for creating systematic review. The intention of this paper is not to present a strict rule of how an SR should be automated, nor to indicate specific tools or technology for that purpose. The objective here is just to highlight, based on what has already been presented in scientific literature on this topic, the stage of the literature review pipeline with greatest potential for automation. We try to indicate what should be the focus of the researchers on artificial intelligence when they go to work within this team. This pipeline shows not only a sequence of technical steps required for the creation of automatic literature review, but also the respective artificial intelligence techniques that can be useful in each phase. In the searching phase, computational techniques can help by suggesting terms to maximize the amount of documents retrieved. However, the human operator remains essential to carry out the process. Thus, this phase is considered to have a medium automation potential. At the screening stage, we consider that it has a low potential for automation currently. That statement comes from the fact that the conversion of tests in vectors, while preserving semantic relations, is still incipient, among other causes due to the small number of positive training examples available. Test classification methods are extremely dependent on the good conversion of tests into vectors, since the accuracy of classification is highly impacted by extraction of test characteristics. Usually, ML-based classification methods depend on training data to learn patterns. In systematic reviews, the number of papers labeled as included is less than the size of the set of excluded papers, which makes it difficult to properly adjust ML-based model due to this imbalance of sets. As previously mentioned, given the risk of losing potentially relevant papers during the screening stage, researchers may not feel secure in delegating the exclusion of much of retrieved papers to an automatic classification process. Thus, we believe it is still necessary to develop new methods for extracting more precise test characteristics so that it's possible to consider the automatic sorting as a simple time saver for researchers. The extraction and synthesis steps present a great potential to be automated. In these stages, computational techniques operate by extracting and organizing important information from tests. Various techniques for extracting certain data from tests are being developed and can be applied in the stage of automatic creation of literature reviews. Especially for medical reviews, which are already more standardized, there is a great potential for applying these techniques. Nevertheless, as the natural language processing keeps evolving, it's possible to imagine, for a near future, the extraction of tests for automatically creating literature reviews to be applied to some other areas of knowledge, such as social science. This pipeline is not a strict rule. It shows the artificial intelligence techniques useful in each step and combines several techniques from different projects. Automating literature reviews is a promising research field because the number of published papers grows every year. The large amount of available texts makes human work difficult in writing scientific literature reviews. For this reason, the development of computational tools to assist researchers in this purpose continues to arouse interest in the scientific community. It's important to highlight that, due to the many limitations of the existing computational techniques, there are still no definitive standardized tools to help in the automatic creation of systematic reviews. In this way, the papers found in the literature only present a specific or partial solutions for certain stages of the construction of a systematic review. The supervised methods, despite being very useful in some of these phases, face the problem of the lack of the data for training. Consequently, these techniques present less potential for development in SR. As for the unsupervised methods, there are greater possibilities. Summarization, visualization, and document clustering are examples of tasks that can help researchers deal with the large number of publications available, without relying on previously labeled databases for training. For this reason, the development of computational models that will contribute to the reduction of human workload, especially during the operational stages of a SR, can provide more agility to the process of generating scientific knowledge. These articles bring together some existing initiatives aimed at this purpose. In the stages of search, screening, extraction, and synthesis, some computational techniques have already been used in order to facilitate the reviewer's work. For future work, the computational implementation of the proposed pipeline will be carried out. Ideally, the implementation will use mainly unsupervised methods to avoid relying on training data, which is still very scarce. We intend to use existing algorithms for grouping, extracting, and synthesizing information available in the literature that the best adapt to the scenario that being worked on. Our ultimate goal is to achieve a complete solution to automate the operational steps of a systematic literature review. As a subsequent step to the development of the prototype, we intend to test it in application from different areas of knowledge and make it available for specialized researchers in these areas to qualitatively evaluate the results obtained. And here is reference of this work.
Hello everyone, my name is Sergio de Souza and today I will present a work that we developed. Its title is Neuralink Supervision Model for Search of Specialists in Scientific Data Repository. That is, we are proposing a model with a weak supervision to perform ranking in specialist searches. Here we have the agenda of presentation, starting with the introduction, going through motivation, methodology, giving emphasis in weak supervision, and the dual embedding LSTM model. Then we talk about the data characteristics used and generated. And finally, the result and conclusion. Introduction. The main question that this paper tries to answer is it possible to train a deep neural model with little or no data labeled to search and retrieval expertise and have good result? The answer is yes, and now I will show you how we got there. Given the large amount of data stored and generated, the difficulty of find candidates with appropriate profiles for some activities is notorious. In this context, to try to solve these problems, we have recovery or search for expertise, which is one of the branches of information retrieval. Information retrieval and expertise retrieval, despite having the same objective as searching and ranking within a database, have a structural difference. In traditional information retrieval, we have a structure similar to the one on this slide, where Q represents a query, D represents the document, and F the function that calculates the score of that query and document relationship. There are works that try to optimize their three stages of the search: querying, documents, and the score function. Here we have a general structure in expertise retrieval. We have an extra layer in a structure and an extra function to calculate the score. Given a query Q, the system will return the relevant documents that are used as indirect units of information about specialist candidate C. When a search is performed, the system will return documents ranked using function F1. These documents are grouped with an F2 function composing the score of each candidate. In this example, the search returned D1, D2, and D3. These three documents are relevant to author C1, while C2 is only author of D3. If F2 function is the sum of the relation between document and query, the final score of C1 will probably be high. As can be seen, this type of search tends to have a great degree of complexity. One of the machine learning classification is supervised learning, where the model tries to learn and evaluate it with previously defined labels for its data. When these labels are noisy or have errors, the model is said to have a weak supervision. Another definition used for weak supervision is when labels are generated using some kind of heuristics. We will use the second type in our work. In context of information retrieval, when we use machine learning, we need a dataset containing the query, documents with positive scores, and documents with negative scores. These scores, which are also called relevance judgments, and can be generated using weak supervision. Neural networks are models that, for good performance, need a lot of data, and since we are dealing with supervised problem, we need that data to be labeled. So weak supervision will help in this great challenge of obtaining of the relevant pseudo-judgments. The biggest advantages of neural models are benefit from large volumes of data and your great ability to generalize and learn contexts. An interesting information that we can see in the graph on the right, when we have an x-axis the volume of data 2 rising to 7, 8, up to 17. On the y-axis, we have NDCG, a measure of effectiveness of the returned ranking that take into account relevance and position. Within the graph, this horizontal dashed line is a traditional information retrieval model. It does not vary if you increase the data volume. With this two neural network, we can see the growth in its effectiveness as the data volume increases. Motivation. Now I will talk about the motivations of this work, starting with the fact that a large amount of data benefit neural models. Unlike areas such as image and natural language processing, neural networks are a recent topic for information retrieval. Weak supervision can help in cases when little or no data labeled. Finally, the literature on ranking of specialists using data from plataforma lattes is still very small. Methodology. About the methodology we are proposing in summary is: use the keywords found in scientific papers as queries. They were selected because, as can be seen in E2012 work, keywords represent clearly and objectively the subject that permeate the documents. To calculate the labels between query and positive documents, we will use language model with Dirichlet smoothing. For a score of negative documents, we will use deep autoencoder to find the most distant documents given a query. And finally, a model for re-ranking documents called Dual Embedding LSTM, detailing the process of defining positive documents. We used Elasticsearch Server to speed up the experiment. Within it, we configured the use of language model algorithm with Dirichlet smoothing, which is robust to calculate the similarity relationship between documents and queries. With that, we select up to 20 best documents for each query. Now detailing the process of defining negative documents. The first step is to group documents by candidate author. Generate a bag of words for each candidate using TF-IDF, that is a vector containing the weighted frequency of the term. Train a deep autoencoder. With the encoder, we select the most distant candidates from each query using the cosine similarity. We then extracted the documents from these candidates. We match the number of negative documents with the number of positive documents for each query. We can see the structure of the proposed deep autoencoder. We start with the entry equals the number of terms extracted, followed by layers with 500, 100, and finally 50 neurons. The process is reversed, creating the whole grass shape. The first part of the model is called encoder. The data between it and the dimension is reduced to each layer. After that, we have the decoder that tries to recreate what the data was like from the smaller dimension. With the encoder step, we used to reduce dimension of each candidate to 50 latent dimension, We do the same with the queries, and finally, we compare query and candidates with the cosine similarity as previously described. We extracted the documents of the most distant candidates and used them as negative documents for the query. With a set of queries, positive documents and negative documents, we go to the final step where we propose the dual embedding LSTM model that we bring all these elements together and generate a new score. The model received this name because it has two data inputs that transform into an embedding and continues using LSTM layers, as can be seen in the right diagram. As a dual model, it has two data entries. The first enters the query and the second the document that goes through an embedding layer to transform the data into a smaller dimension, followed by LSTM layer that try to learn the context of each sentence. After a fully connected layer, query and document are merged using Hadamard product, and finally, a series of fully connected layers. The model tries to classify how relevant a document is with positive values to positive documents and negative values to negative documents. This is whole framework that we propose. Now we will talk about the data used, results, and conclusions. We used the Lexer database presented by Mangaravich 2016a, which contains data extracted from Plataforma Lattes in 2016 and has the following specifications. More than 200,000 candidates with doctorate, over 11 million documents contain title, keywords, authors, and year of publication, 235 queries, and 35 relevant judgments made by experts. This set of queries and judgments are important because we will use them to evaluate our models. With more than 11 million documents, we extracted more than 1.8 billion of valid keywords that we will use as queries, used in the stage of positive and negative documents and training of the dual embedding LSTM model. And precisely for this model, we need to filter the terms with low frequency, because as it in a neural model, it will not learn good representation for terms that are little used. So we filter terms with frequency less than 20. The graphs show the histogram of the quantity of terms by frequency. We can see the long tail phenomenon here. In short, after all the transformation and the models to generate the weak supervision, we have the following sets of information. More than 200,000 terms, over 1.8 million queries, over 8 million used documents, and more than 41 million triples of query, document, and scores, including half of positive documents selected with language model and half of negative documents selected with deep autoencoder. This large amount of data is passed to the dual embedding LSTM model, where 80% of the data is used for training and the other 20% for the validation. The library used to build the network was PyTorch, and we used the Google Colab platform. Regarding the set of negative documents, we tested a group selected at random and another group selected with the transformation of the deep autoencoder. Results. In this first table of results, we have the model trained in 5 epochs for the set of random negative documents and the autoencoder negative documents. The NDCG at 10 is the metric with the measure the efficiency of the score generated for the result of the top 10 reported by the model. The closer the one, the better. The accuracy column measures the result of the neural model training. We can see that from the third epoch on the model start to worsen the NDCG, indicating that overfitting is happening. And the NDCG, the autoencoder, is better than Rondo. The second table compares the results obtained with the literature for the NDCG metric. The first 3 are presented in Mangaravit 2060b and are based on models of information theory. Dirichlet was the model used for weak supervision of positive documents, while the bolder results uses the proposed neural model. We can see that the combination of weak supervision with Dirichlet and autoencoder followed by the dual embedding LSTM model surpasses all the baselines show. Conclusions. A proposed framework that involves the generate of judgments of relevance for positive documents, the selection of negative documents using deep autoencoder together with dual embedding LSTM model obtained positive results compared to baselines, indicating that it is possible to use neural models in supervised problems even without labels for training in expertise retrieval. Another important point is that the technique of selection negative documents with deep autoencoder surpassed the random selection of negative documents. Future works include test the performance of our framework using BERT in few steps, develop pairwise architecture where the model receives 2 documents and a query. It returns positive if the first document is more relevant than second. Propose variations of dual embedding LSTM architecture. Weight document by publication date to give greater weight to recent publication. Here we have the list of cited references. Finally, I leave my contact for questions and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, that's following second EAI International Conference on Data and Information in Online Environments. My name is Fabio Moreira and I'm professor at São Paulo State University. I'm a co-author of the paper Propensity to Use an Array of Data Collection Device in Agricultural Research, together with Jacqueline Camperos Reyes, Fernando de Assis Rodrigues, and Ricardo Santana. I start this presentation point out that access to information as a success factor in areas of human activities gained protagonism with the intensive adoption of the ICTs. This fact implies in a scenario characterized by the increase in the volume of information generated and shared, the speed of content dissemination, and the variety of information objects present in the accessible data flows in the digital environment. The education, research, and outreach project activities are also impregnated by this effect. So, an important sector such as agriculture cannot be left out this phenomenon because one of the most relevant research demands in Brazil is the agricultural area that places the country as the most productive in Latin America and 50 in the world ranking by CIMAGO. The results obtained in agricultural research show an increasing dependence on the intensive use of data with a bigger volume and variety, origin in different environments and through different technologies. With the occurrence of different techniques for data collection in agricultural research, this investigation is constructed in the context of the aerial survey. That is a set of operations to obtain land, air, and sea data from embedded technologies for data collection and transmission using the technological resources from aerial platform and control station. In this sense, this research addressed the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, as an instrument applied in aerial data collection activities within studies in the agricultural area. Considering the presence of more than one designation for these instruments, like UAVs, RPA, and even drones, emerged the requirement to use in this study the definition of aerial data collective device, ADCD, to refer to the set determined by the aerial platform and the control platform through embedded technologies has the ability to carry out aerial data collection. Our research starts with the following questions. What is the propensity to use aerial data collection device in agricultural area research as a resource for data collection? What results may be generated with the use of this type of resource? Considering those questions, the objective of the research is to categorize the possibilities of using ADCD for data collection in agricultural research, paying attention to how this device is being used in research performed by higher education institutions. The methodological procedure starts from a systematic collection of research in the agricultural area in which the ADCD term was used or referenced in data collection. The research universe is the result of studies in theses or dissertations formed with a sample restricted to publication of the postgraduate program of the USP, Unicamp, and Unesp, published in the years between 2015 and 2017, available in the respective institutional online repositories. The definition of the selection criteria to represent the corpus, like the document type, geographic domain, and institution, is present in the paper. The repositories of theses and dissertations of the three educational institutions were used as a source for obtaining the studies to be analyzed. The search expressions were used Portuguese terms like veículo aéreo não tripulado, drone, and aeronave remotamente pilotada, concatenated with the terms agricultura, agrícola, pecuária, and ambiental. After recovering the scientific production in those repositories, it was made a classification of the results by reading the title and the abstracts to prove the existence of adherence to the subject analyzed. The content analysis was applied for the treatment of the corpus. The definition of the categories was based on the possibilities of data collection with ADCD. The results was obtained from the sample analysis allow observing a partial view of how Brazilian higher education institutions use ADCD in agricultural research. After applying the methodological strategy, the corpus is composed of 12 documents from UNESP, 3 documents from USP, and 3 documents from Unicamp. For the content analyzed were defined 5 categories to represent the type of use provided by the ADCDs in data collection within agricultural research. Soil diagnosis, that consists in the analytical process to qualify the soil based on characteristics such as fertility, typology, and structure. Plant diagnosis is the analytical process to determine crop phytophysiognomy and identify the presence of the pests and threats. Management of grazing areas is the systematic practice of planning strategies and control of factors related to the organization and the welfare of livestock in grazing space. Crop management consists of activities of planning, strategies, and control of factors related to the development of the crop, such as quality of the vegetation cover, the arrangement of plants in the area, and the application of techniques to improve productivity. And hydrograph monitoring is the state of surveillance of availability of water resources and the control of irrigation system. In the table 1 of the paper, it can be observed the definition established for each class, the consult works that are associated with each one, as well as the attributes of the data collected in its investigation. The complete table is present in the paper. The figure 1 summarizes the incidence of studies for each category differentiated by the institution where the research was carried out. How about the incidence of research by category and by institutions? The category in which most of the documents were associated was crop management. A total of 9 documents were associated with this category. 5 relate to UNESP, carried out in the cartographic science and geography (PGP), 2 research each, and agronomy. The 2 investigations carried out at USP correspond to one in the area of sciences and the other in the area of agricultural system engineering, and 2 studies were developed at Unicamp, one in the area of agricultural engineering and the other in the area of geography. How about category plant diagnosis? A total of 4 documents of the corpus were associated with this category, being the second most representative category in the analyzed contest. All the studies associated with this category were carried out at UNESP, 2 of them in the area of cartographic sciences, 1 in agronomy, and the other in ecology. The category defined as hydrographic monitoring comprises ADCDs were associated with two documents of the corpus, one being developed in the Mechanical Engineering PGP of Unicamp and another in the UNESP at the Agronomy PGP. The category Soil Diagnosis, it was also associated with two documents, both carried out in UNESP, one in the area of agronomy and the other in geography. Only one research was associated with this category, management of grazing areas, in which carried out in PGP of Sciences at USP. Regarding the representativeness of the categories concerning the sample of documents analyzed, research related to the use of ADCD for crop management 50%, predominated, followed by the use of ADCD in plant diagnosis 22%. The categories soil diagnosis and hydrographic monitoring obtained the same percentage of representativeness, 11% each. And a less representative category, the use of the device for management of grazing areas, with 6%. Now we have some conclusions. The results obtained determined that the use of ADCD for data collection in agricultural research is already a reality, and that it can be applied both in nature science, like agronomy and biology, and math sciences, like engineering and cartography, and humanity science, like geography, or any specialization that address research within the agricultural context. It was verified that the propensity is towards studies that focus on improvements in crop management. Some aspects can be covered by information science areas, such as the singularity related to creating the data obtained through ADCD and what are the essential requirements for a repository to support the availability of the data collected within this type of device, and others. At the least, we believe these results may contribute to researchers who present the need to collect data and co-project trends of applying ADCD to obtain data with a higher level of quality and economic benefit compared to other access research. And well, to finish, I would like to appreciate the organizing committee of second EAI Dione and everyone that will be watching this presentation. Here is my email for contact and the others authors contact too. Thank you.
Today, Ana Claudia Golcio and Mimi Mirelis Puerta Diaz, both of Sao Paulo State University, will be discussing the results of our research titled A Model for Analysis of Environmental Accident Based on Physiologic, a case study of the Exxon Valdez oil spill, with the collaboration of Professor Mariana Claudia Broen, Jose Artur Quilisi Gonzalez, Daniel Martinez Avila, and Mariana Eunice Quilisi Gonzalez. The second half of the 20th century witnessed a long debate on corporate social responsibility. From this point forward, CSR, and in recent decades, a renewed interest has arisen with the proposal of new concepts and interdisciplinary relations to study this topic. This growing interest was accompanied by the substantial publication of CSR article in Journal on Management, focusing on ethical and environmental issues. Although there has been a parallel ground in scientific publication that analyze this phenomenon, there are few critical approaches based on methods that data mining on fossil logic to identify the assignation and recognition of corporate social responsibility. Fossil logic is the logic underlying approximate, rather than exact, reasoning mode, and therefore it can be considered adequate for analysis involving subjective property or inaccurate attributes, absent in the research that is traditionally conducted on the topic of interest to CSR. This research aims to fill this gap that exists in the traditional literature by examining the capacity of corporate response when facing environmental accidents based on the processing of massive database on public opinion. Considering issues about environmental disaster, we believe it is interesting to find out if there was an initiative over time to assume corporate social responsibility by companies that caused major environmental disasters. There are three key points we'll be discussing today. I want to begin by describing the aim of the project and the methodology, and then I move on to the principal results, describing in depth every phase of our conceptual model. I was speaking about the data collection, filtering, and pre-processing phase, and the mapping the ethical vocabulary. In the second part of this presentation, the researcher Ana Claudia Goza will explain how to do the fossil rule-based system was developed and how the conceptual model was validated, and she will also discuss the final result. Now that you're aware of the overview, let's begin describing the aim and the methodology of our research. The objective of this paper is to present a conceptual model based on fossil logic for the analysis of environmental accidents, aiming at the discovery of corporate social responsibility initiative by companies responsible for disasters. So we propose a conceptual model which gathers analysis of an ethical vocabulary and a fossil rule-based system to predict possible ethical and social responsibility responses given by companies that have caused environmental and reported disaster through the media. We analyzed an accident considered one of the biggest environmental man-made disasters that occurred on March the 24th, 1989 in Prince William Sound, Alaska, when the oil tanker Exxon Valdez spilled more than 10 million gallons of American crude oil. Data collection was carried out in the online news database of the New York paper, the New York Times, in this temporary window. So this is our conceptual model, and it represents a sequence of 4 phases. In the first one, we had 3 sub-steps. One referred to the data collection, a filtering step, and another called the pre-processing, where the data retrieved will be cleaned for analysis. The second phase is dedicated to mapping the ethical vocabulary. Here we use the data output from the previous phase, and the third one corresponds to the description of the fossil rule-based system. Finally, in the fourth phase, the results obtained are represented graphically and analyzed in depth. For data collection, first, the environmental accident and the database for news analysis must be chosen. In our case of study, we select the oil spill by the tanker Exxon Valdez had the environmental accident to be analyzed. For the news database, the online corpus, the New York Times, was selected. The model used 2 types of filters, one for period and another by keyword. We filtered the data from March the 24th, 1989 to September the 1, 2017, and we retrieved only news items containing the word Exxon. Then we obtained 2001 news from the New York Times online databases, and we assigned for each news item an identification number from 0 to 2000. Then, in pre-processing phase, the metadata was filtered and some natural language processing methods were also applied. The natural language methods were applied to the 2001 news retrieved and stored in the file dbexo. And we applied tokenization, removal of stop word, lemmatization, and anagram. In the second phase, the mapping of the ethical vocabulary was done in the filtered and preprocessed database. This feature shows the deployment of the term of the ethical vocabulary following the categorization described in the methodology. We have three groups of concepts: one of the assignation of responsibility, a second of concept of recognition of responsibility, and the third one of neutral concept. In this stage, we made a mapping and located those new that contain the words of the ethical vocabulary, and this mapping was divided into three parts. We first identified the important stem of each word and the ethical vocabulary using the website Morfandunner, and we searched the important stem in the word in the cleaning and preprocessing database using the search developed in Python. In the third stage, we related the data from the second stage to the year in which the news was published. That is, we showed the relationship between the idea of the news, the year in which it was published, and the words of the ethical vocabulary present in the news. In the fourth step, we separated this information year by year and calculated the occurrence of words from the ethical vocabulary to the group of neutral concepts, for the group of assignation concept, and for the group of recognition concept. We calculated that in the year 2000, we record 12 news items that have some words of the ethical vocabulary. Of these 12 news items, we have 276 possibility of occurrence of word in the vocabulary belonging to the group of responsibility assignation, 108 possibility of occurrence of word belonging to the group of responsibility recognition, and 72 possibility of occurrence of word from the group of neutral concept. From each group of concepts, we counted the respective occurrence of the word, and the same calculation was made for the other years' analysis by the proposed model. In the previous stage, we obtained some data that led us to map the dynamic of the ethical vocabulary over time. In the year 1991, the New York Times reported that the judge accepted the Exxon patent, and the Exxon Valdez-Speed lawsuit ended with $900 million payment by Exxon over 10 years to the trust fund administered by 3 state officials and 3 federal officials. In addition, the Exxon company was responsible for the additional payment of $100 million necessary for the recovery of the affected area. It is interesting to note that the term compensation reached the peak in 2006, which may be related to the proximity of the deadline of 50 years to request a new financial compensation for the civil agreement of Exxon Corporation with the Department of Justice of the State of Alaska, valued at $900 million. Data from the mapping of the ethical vocabulary were used to construct the variable of the fuzzy system, the third phase that will be described by Ana Claudia Goes.
Thank you, Alice, for the introduction. My name is Ana Claudia. Now I'm going to talk about the first rule-based system. Lofty-Zadeh, in 1916, suggested an alternative set theory less rigid than the usual. This theory was called the fuzzy set theory. With the fuzzy set, the possibility of interpreting non-quantitative and variable also increasing the need to seek mechanisms for inference from this data. One of these mechanisms was the fuzzy rule-based system. A fuzzy rule-based system is a system that uses fuzzy logic to produce output from fuzzy inputs. In short, a FRBS consists of 4 components connected. They are fuzzification model, rule model, inference model, and the fuzzification model. In this work, we elaborate the fuzzy rules-based system called MARS, that means Model for Social Responsibility Analysis. It was developed using mandamus inference methods and implemented using MATLAB software. Here we present the membership function of each one of the input variables. They are identical in the three cases. This is neutral, recognition, and assignation. They are of trapezoidal type. The values of input variables are mapped by their respective membership functions that were constructed based on the occurrences of the words of the ethical vocabulary in the corpus. The input variables were classified as low, medium, and right. According to an equidistant partition of the universe of discourse. The universe of discourse was defined considering the maximum value obtained in the previous table in relation of the three variables recognition, assignation, and neutral. We have in Mars an output variable called indicator SR, denoted by I. We present the membership function of a triangular type of the output variable in this table. The universe of discourse of the output variable was defined considering the three values -1, +1, and 0. They refer respectively to the idea that assigned is a negative measure for the company responsible for the environmental disaster, recognized is a positive measure, and 0 means that a value could not be assigned. So, the output variables was classified as assigned, no evidence, and recognized according to results of the mapping of ethical vocabulary and from the analysis in the database. The intervals of triangular functions were constructed considering the idea of a range. The rules were built after a careful analysis of the database and the result of the mapping of ethical vocabulary. We need at least 27 rules so that all combination of terms of the input variables. The fuzzy holes used in the Mars are defined in this table. Here we show an example of application of Mars MATLAB. The example shows that in 1991, when we have 5% of neutral concepts, 3% of recognition concepts, and 5% of assigned concepts, Mars returns the value of indicator SR as -1. This result of applying Mars in all years collected in the corpus is described in this table. Note that we have only one result recognized, and that happened in the year 1999. These graphs show you the result of the application of Mars in the corpus. The diameter of the circles reflects the occurrence of the concepts from the ethical vocabulary in the year, and the color green, red, and purple represent respectively the classification made in no evidence, assigned, and recognized. The graphs show that in these years, The news published about Exxon by the New York Times highlights in the majority a certain assignation of social responsibility to the Exxon due to the Exxon Valdez accident, while it was only in 1999 that we had some prominence in the news published about the recognition by the company of its responsibility in relation to the oil spill in Alaska. The internal validity was evaluated by comparing the results obtained in Mars with a manual classification of the specialist in no evidence assigned and recognized of 30% of the 29 years analyzed in the corpus. This result is here in this table. Although the error rate seems high, 10%, when analyzed year by year, we observed that 30% of the years analyzed were tested, and a more specific analysis, we can infer that the model had an error in 4 out of 210 news classified manually, reducing the error rate to less than 2%. Considering the large number of tested news and the complexity involved in the analysis in question, we consider that the model performs well in the classification of news. To conclude that, in these years, the news published about Exxon brings information on topics related to assignation of social responsibility to the Exxon for the environment disaster in Alaska. Through the facts occurred, we realized that the classification obtained through our model as assigned is related to the relevant events in the same period. We also highlight that the results are similar in both types of analysis, that is, by year and by news, and these results show that the proposed model proved to be adequate to develop of this type of analysis. We also highlight the advantage of the high potential for adapting of this model to the study of assigned and recognized social responsibility in relation to other environment accidents. To conclude, we would like to thank to FAPESP and CAPES from support during the development of this paper. These are the bibliographic references used in the development of this work. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon or morning, whichever it is for you. We're excited to be a part of the second Dione conference. Myself, Sarah Vollmer, and my colleague and friend, Rachel Ho, are both digital media PhD students remotely working, Graham Wakefield's Alice Lab at York University, Canada. Together, we form the current founding members of IVAS, or Independent Various Arts Space. This art collective is dedicated to investigating the connection of an audiovisual media form between real and virtual spaces, while striving to create a new visual and creative production. We reframe contemporary issues through hybrid and interdisciplinary visual forms. Therefore, we are trying to do a synthetic experiment of exhibition, curation, and creative production in the real world and virtual game space. Luminiferous Funeral is one such project we will address today. We hope you find our project as exciting as we do, and we look forward to the rest of the week. Luminiferous Funeral, Journeying in Delusional Pavilions can be thought about in the following way. We are addressing climate change post-truth through a new form of scholarly communication, as previous forms have been as yet unsuccessful. We therefore use e-science, cloud-based, user-centric data accumulation and processing through deep learning and machine learning methodologies for data curation into interactive art as activism to appeal to humanity's climate crisis denial, apathy, and miseducation or misunderstanding. In response to the growing climate crisis, Luminiferous Funeral is an interdisciplinary VR game artwork with a physical sensory perception installation. This work focuses on exploring the invisible erosion of climate change and environmental breakdown by offering audiences an opportunity to dialogue with nature and seeks to focus participants on the inner communication with oneself about the essential nature of life and death. The relationship to nature is harnessed by our open source framework in which we seek collaborative interactivity from others, encouraging them to journey within their local nature space and document their phenomenological relationship with the environment through sound clips, sketches, video, photographs, and other forms of digital media. Through communication with corresponding environmental and climate scientists, and by combining this user-centric data input with known local climate and weather models, the playable game art is continuously evolving. Downloadable game patches periodically transform a player's VR world. With a Zen-inspired ideology, our cloud-based AI systems employ NLP on text describing Eastern and Western philosophies of nature, power, fear and love, space and environment, which are crafted into poetic expressions and physical interpretations of this ongoing accumulation of climate content and are used to create the downloadable game content. Luminiferous Funeral pulls together from an interdisciplinary framework. We combine education through the public pedagogy of art installations, AIM art, for aesthetic, personal interactivity it offers, virtual reality for embodied perception, haptics for the integration of sensorial experiences, customization for machine learning algorithms to create poetic curation of content, and climate and environment for the subjective individual experience and objective data reference. Education in general is a means of transmitting and cultivating accumulated cultures, skills, and habits from one to another through appropriate pedagogies and didactism, producing a permanent change in one's behavior. In its narrow sense, we can consider two ways of educating, personal and popular, direct and indirect, where popular education occurs beyond formal education institutions, different from schooling practices. It primarily enlightens and affects the self-awareness extension in individuals on the basis of direct and indirect manners through grassroots social activism and movements. Instead of a given and closed system, as in school education, public pedagogy of popular education is dynamic, fluid, and open, embedding itself within multiple overlapping and contested sites of learning. Through public pedagogies of art installations, the general public learns social and political insights by participating in the process of happenings. With Luminiferous Funeral, we create an accessible and continuously evolving platform for discussion and education on world issues, and in this context, the climate crisis. Relating to communal constructivism and knowledge-building pedagogies for virtual worlds, where over time, the differences in human choice on behavior affecting the environment will be made tangible and therefore discussable, as artifacts created by one individual are fed back into subsequent iterations, emphasizing the use of past learners and their artifacts to influence the learning experience of future interactants. Artifacts are thus leveraged to extend their own knowledge. A blended medium formed by immutability and mutability of digits and strings with specific syntax rules, digital technology has once placed the hope as a utopia of neutrality. Since digital technology has been acting as a sort of new age Cold War weapon with tools of propagating political ideologies, the negative impression of technological phobia in the general public has been growing since the middle of last century. Such an implicit association with war and politics, its existence seems like a kind of an original sin and accompanies biased impressions. The popularity and the growth of internet technologies further amplifies the level of panic in this phobia. People are afraid that the possibility of being monitored and threatened by prerogatives or a higher special power would become a permanent normal. Again, while facing uncertain and abstract objects, which are difficult to sense and understand directly, people would arguably rather panic and consider them as a threat and present a propensity of negative affective responses. In particular, the missing right to discourse regarding the use and adoption of digital technologies further expands this anxiety. People consider their life may spiral out of control and without visible and perceivable precursors or traces. Arguably, the World Wide Web extends the boundary of physical geography and enriches the global narrative amplified to and multiplied by the world, where clusters in the various relationships with different cultures are loud, pervasive, and omnipresent. This connected web flattens the spatial morphometric of the world. It shortens the cost of communication and explodes the complexity of power relations among the many different societies. Under the everyday impact of globalization, the power relationships on the World Wide Web are striking that capital. Political and ideological exchanges from different organizations that run on this virtual world. The one who holds the right to discourse of digital technologies is empowered to control the standard of defining society, the world, and even people themselves, where then the gain of relevant converted result, tangible and intangible capital, is made uniquely accessible. This is similar to a Gestalt shift in that the closed loop of input-output strengthens the hegemony of such purposeful ideology, or so-called common sense, which, of course, seduces people into attempts at self-adjusting and self-acquiring power relations to their surroundings, space, nature, station, without recognizing that they have been held captive within the grip of a permeating, perceptive, altering mind trap. Overall, the so-called digital divide, or the democratic claim of technologies, is more about the consideration of the justice of space, geography of power, and cultural prejudice. Instead of suggesting that the public directs their hatred, anger, and phobia toward machines, it might be more suitable to say that they are instead suffering the loss of being deprived the right to self-distribute the space in their power relations within society. The proposition of the open source movement provides unique possibilities to create new spatial relations and allows individuals to re-examine the importance of the multiplicity of space, thus regaining their allocation rights to the grand narrative of the world. This is one of the original aspirations of our current research program. We wish to demonstrate the multiplicity and simultaneity of space with a perceptible form to the public through a methodology of cross-cutting space occupation and allocation to therefore understand the means in which one can regain this right to discourse.
Since the experience of appreciation is critical of understanding the nature of athletics, such the experience is a dominant manner of interpreting the nature of art. So the significant purpose of athletics is to determine and seek a shareable base point that allow experiences and athletic objects to coexist in the coordinate system of natures. Briefly to say, the subjectiveness in the process of athletic experience present as a corporate reality, experiencing art through embodied bodies. Both Western and East Asian cultures share a similar concept of atmosphere and climate about the relation between human beings and athletic objects. Atmosphere and climate are fusion of spirit and rhythm, which are firmly emotion and perception related. The reality of atmosphere is a catalyst of fusing a subject and object, and an intermediary status of expressing and representing this fusion. In 2014, authors Xiao Wu and Wei Xia published an interdisciplinary project, Awakening of PVS Patients to help explore the potentiality of individual self-consciousness. PVS, also called persistent vegetative state, means patients with severe brain injuries. Those patients, no matter how they look, no matter who they are, they're nearly the same. Most of them cannot avoid a tragic destiny, and eventually, their family cannot help out, but must turn off all the machines that maintain their lives. The symptom of PVS is unresponsive wakefulness, which is different from patients presenting with a coma. This means that their body is still functional. The problem is that the neuron in the brain has a disturbance of communicating with each other. Since human brains are skillful at self-restoration, this is a chance that in patients with a low level of consciousness, awareness can be aroused when a specific nerve gets stimulated. Look back to this project. They employ a multidimensional sensory strategy by patients' unique content with custom artistic materials, like video and interactive sound storybooks. This project had more than 300 previous patients have awake and create over 50 shared documentary libraries. This inspired us to think about the possibility of awakening the PVS of climate crisis through a similar strategy. So we contextualize sensory perception and excitement by acknowledging that the brain can be activated by direct impression. By presenting a careful created virtual space, we activate the scheme through participatory tactile and haptic images of environmental information and climate data. Here I quote a report from NASA In the last 650,000 years, there have been 7 circles of glacier advance and retreat, marking the beginning of the modern climate era and human civilization. We, one of the generous systems on Earth, both well familiar to the cause and the result of the climate crisis, like global temperature rise, warming ocean, shrinking ice sheet, glacier retreat, decreasing snow cover, sea level rise, declining Arctic sea ice extreme event. Even children can tell you about them easily. Everyone is talking about climate change and global warming, but only a few pay actions to improve the current situation. We protest and we show the predictable result of this crisis to the public through various formats, but why people are still unconscious to this bloody fact? It's precisely the problem of others. How can we feel others' feeling as we can merely observe their representations? No matter the object whose and rich encounter with us have its alibi. We have never had a chance to know how others feel and what they sense, but only the subsequent outcome after the happening of others' experience, which we can only capture and observe. Is there an intermedium that could transform others' feeling into our personal feeling? Similar to appropriation, one of the general strategies in contemporary art. Authors always passion for investigating and self-reflecting the social and political issues relating to humans, animal, and environment. Art as activism is not only a simple slogan, but a critical consideration to find a way to evoke the general public's consciousness about the imbalance between human and nature. David Butland has organized a series of contemporary expedition inspired by 19th century artist explorers. This warriors, known as the Cape Farewell Project, hosts artists and scientists to Arctic and the other region affected by climate change. In Vanishing Ice, he documents tests that he projects on the face of glacier. Yongping Huang consider animal humanized representation of social, cultural, religious, and political competition and negotiation. Bertrand Chopin, number 2, is transformed and reincarnated. It's also diverged from religious pleasures, addressing territorial dispute as to the leading cause of power relationship restructuring in domestic and global societies. Boundaries are continually moving. The road is always being remapped. Negotiations are inevitable. We are expected to provide our answer. Who are we? Where are we? How can we live with others? So here's the other question. How can authors utilize in real-time nature data as a creative media to deliver? Our project Miso is a great example. It suggests that living data brings together stories from scientific data and local cultural knowledge expressed through all diverse languages. Messages will be presented as Miso living data to contribute to the IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and help advance connection with the issue of climate change over the period 2020 to 2023. It's developing scientific papers with online components and an interactive map that will evolve as stories are shared. So how authors resolve the problem of the self to audience communication and data exchanging that offers chance of immersing into audience to audiences? With Androm, Dominic has created a VR world allowing viewers to journey inward to access the alternative state of consciousness. It uses technology to create both an internal and seance-like communal experience. It wraps the viewer in a fluid, hypnotic environment. As authors describes, as opposite to thinking of VR as a tool for escape or for constructing an artificial world, it's more exciting for me to envision it as a kind of organic and mental space in which abstraction and consciousness can be questioned. So this example inspires us to think how a higher level of exchanging sensory perception exists between self to others through data. How can a strategy of mutual appropriation between nature, human, and mechanical data function on one's awareness, letting people feel how nature and others feel? To experience that nature to others are experiencing. There are 3 ways to negotiate with this world. First, people can interact with our VR game at our exhibition or download the game from online game store. Second, they can also share the emotional expression with text, image, video, and sound through the chat box. It will work as an interface connecting human, machine, and nature into ecosystem. Users can share the emotional data at any time, anywhere. Third, for extending and mutual transmitting data to sensory perception, people can follow the instruction and download our open source repo of the custom on Polyhaptic from our GitHub. On the other side, we also use the public nature data and our field research data as one of the main contents in this world. Here's the essential game content of our project. Flying to Myself is a video game-based interactive installation that describes a poetry space about death and lives. Pieces of fragile sentences in this game, which are distributed to game agents, are oriented from others' poetry. Players need to try their best to seek for those beings that carry the separate poetry sentences to sustain the balance between the energy bar of death and soul. This circulating process is a way to review a deep narrative space-time tower and intangible network of our emotional experience of everyday practice. This is the curation plan for our project. We plan to offer a cross-cutting immersive world for audiences to negotiate with this special space. Audiences not only interact with the world through a real headset, but also play with the AI animation projected on the floor and even communicate with our chat box through the PC or their phone. To demonstrate how the meaning of the space gets generated and display the differentiate of the understanding of space, we plan to develop 2JS browser app and project them on the wall.
The installation will pull live data and sonic recordings from the environment in real time, permitting the installation to offer intimate dialogues in any location it is exhibited. In this way, our project seeks to invoke a sense of urgency in participants to further educate themselves during this critical time. The poetic expressions are crafted through NLP and AI techniques trained on Eastern and Western philosophies and understandings of nature, power, fear, and love. And the ghosts are those of the elements of nature that have become extinct or tragically harmed due to climate change. Here, in detail, are the mechanics of the AI curation, user-based updates of content, and exploratory features of the game creatures and world as a continuously evolving ecosystem. The bottom left, we have the AI curation system based on the GPT-2 architecture, where both user input is evaluated and resulting interpretations are fed back into the game. Along the top, starting from the left, we see the audience and game players' digital space, where they explore the creatures and nature environment. While in gameplay, they will collect the philosophical generated text hidden among the creatures, enabling each player to accumulate their own experiences, which are stored as a narrative and used to feed back into the system. The top right emphasizes the touch-based discourse, the haptic and tactile means by which users reach out to touch their digital space, inducing a sensory perceptive understanding of the climate change. To illustrate an experiment with the perception of space, which may or may not be affected by different cultural ideologies, we propose to set up two different natural language processing data packages in which the content is constructed through imagined relationships to space, identifies a sample categorization made by the machine learning algorithm trained to identify common everyday items. Both static and real-time video classification is tested for its level of acceptability for our purposes. As we want to encourage all forms of mediated content, it was crucial to allow video, both user-centric and professional, into the classification system for inclusion in our AI philosophers' curated virtual world. Further, for our project, we expand beyond categorization and identification and instead utilize the input content, climate models, weather patterns, provided images and sounds from local environments, and environmental scientists' expert opinion on eliminating garbage content to generate custom and curated content within the VR world itself. Not unlike a regularly occurring game patch update, our game will undergo continuous evolution as it grows in supplied content and material understanding of itself.
AI system and NLP. We propose to set up two different NLP datasets in which the content is constructed through imagined relationship to space. It identifies a simple categorization made by the ML algorithm trained to identify common everyday items. We expand beyond categorization and identification and instead utilizing the input content to generate custom and curate content within the real world itself. It will undergo continued evolution as it grows in supply content and material understanding of itself. This project is an invitation for thought experiment asking questions about the future world. AI philosophers do not intend to be constructed from a philosophical category made from nothing. On the contrary, they build based on numerous human art tests, and this human-only copies connect with the collaborating humans in current intelligent thought and brings the future to our present. It's here to discover new things from old things, not to confirm the past again from new things. The trained AI philosopher has uploaded to a collab, and we will employ it into our game content and chatbots and upload to the cloud later. That's how it works on our website with mobile and PC interface. People can share tasks, images, and videos to AI philosopher anytime, anywhere.
A core perspective we took when first establishing the parameters of the project was to explore the possibility of leveraging the benefit of a formally educated perspective with the self-appeasing instinct of a personal experience. Would it be possible to create an artwork that actively engages one on a personal yet factual basis? The simulated fantastical virtual world provide a connection to real-world experiences. Establish environmental and climate datasets, verification and filtering provided by field experts, and the user-centric individual worldviews provided by the uploaded digital content, we weave an evolving ecosystem explorable through curiosity-driven sensorial perception. A critical aspect of the curated experience rests on the participant's capacity to interact with the VR world, the stimulation of a touch-based discourse. Spatial recognition is transmitted as one explores the world through haptic feedback situated over the entire body, with specific attention positioned at the hands. We consider a dual perspective, one that distinguishes between spatial things that can be interacted with and temporal experiences that can be lived. The former is experienced through incomplete and one-sided profiles which are presented to the interactant. The latter is experienced such that what it is and what it is perceived to be are the same. In either case, both are existing in a state of essence. This is their true nature. Sensory profiles are both presented and received by means of a mediating technology. These one-sided profiles are crafted explicitly by the isolation and amplification of individual senses, yet the experience of a resulting or reactionary embodied emotional state is individually experienced in the same way as it is perceived. By forcing a directed and consistent exposure to others via linked technology and content exchange, one is lifted from the confines of their internalized perceptive ideations, as in Husserl's eidetic intuition, and instead asked to engage in a participatory exchange of a collective presence. Thus, the use of technology that is intentionally designed to pervasively infect interconnected somatic experiences allows one to exist along and within an action-response continuum where one is encouraged to gain and reinforced to retain a complex awareness of self, others, and environment. It is conceivable that the relationships developed between individuals and a particular mediating technology may intentionally create a space where pre-existing assumptions are challenged through sensory fusions. Here we illustrate the concept plan for a set of custom specialty tactile gloves, which are planned for development this summer. Motivated by minimalist design, low-cost tinkering, soft robotics, and flexible batteries, we develop washable wearables to enhance tactile sensations and pressure focused on the hands and fingertips.
We therefore consider the integration of custom haptic technology and kinesthetic experiences that evolve alongside and are influenced by the content evolution of the submitted climate data, reflect the suggested importance of making tangible these perceivably more abstract and displaced environmental issues. Thus, a series of haptic devices have been and will continue to be developed to expose multiple body-centric aspects of sensory stimulation. Here's a live shot of testing hand tracking and haptic hand models in VR.
In conclusion, Luminiferous Funeral is a game that will evolve to structure itself into a thriving ecosystem through the contribution of text, images, video, sounds, and location data by AI, audiences, and artists. Overall, we wish to amplify the perceptions of the multiplicity and simultaneity of space and environments for the general public to have a closer look at the world they are living in. Further, we ask those who experience the piece to attune to an awareness of knowing and thus to reattain their right to discourse in the grand narrative of the world and current state of climate change. Moreover, since it is also an open source project, we wish for the general public to not only make their own set of haptic devices based on our instruction, but to also share their creative modifications, allowing others to experience and sense an alternative perspective of perception based on the individual's understanding of the world. Finally, since this game art project is based on the concept of a revolving open world narrative, we wish for it to be a sort of everyday experience for the general public and provide them with the tools to consciously question their awareness of the world, their space, and the environment.
Thank you for having us, and thank you to the committee organizing EAI Dione and all our support at York University.